So you've just taken the first step in studying for the MCAT, getting your baseline score. Congratulations! That's kind of a big deal. But if you haven't taken your baseline exam yet, don't worry, you're still in the right place. In these next several minutes, we'll discuss the major features of the MCAT that are most useful for you as you start your MCAT studies. Let's start with the purpose of the MCAT, which is quite similar to the purpose of any standardized test: to accurately compare test scores across large samples of test takers. It's all about getting medical school applicants on the same scale when considering them for admissions. To do this, the AAMC has developed a scoring system specific to the MCAT. Here's how it works. The MCAT has 4 sections. We'll refer to them using their shortened names: Chem Phys, Cars, Biochem, and Psych Soc. And now for each of these sections, test takers receive a score between 118 and 132, a 15-point range. When these 4 scores are combined, we end up with a total score between 472 and 528, and this is your MCAT score. But what does this score actually mean to med school admissions committees? Well, these numbers tell schools how well you did compared to all other MCAT test takers. So essentially, these scores are ranks that correspond to percentiles. A 472 corresponds to the first percentile or less, while anything above a 524 corresponds to the 100th percentile. But the scores between 472 and 528 are not evenly distributed, so here are several additional data points to orient yourself to the scoring system. Now, these numbers shift slightly every year as the testing sample of students evolves, but over the years, these values have stayed relatively consistent. At first glance, the nonlinear relationship between MCAT score and percentile seems like a strange thing, but it makes much more sense once we realize the scoring system is designed to produce a normal distribution centered around 500. So what does this mean for you? Well, for medical school applications, you want your MCAT to be competitive for it to stand out. Depending on the program, most students enter medical school with a score between 508 to 512. But to decide what score would make you competitive, you'll want to make a list of schools you're interested in and look up their average and median MCAT scores to get an idea of a good starting point to set your sights on. With the total score now understood, let's dig a little bit deeper, as not all scores, say a 512, are equal. A 512 can be perfectly balanced across the sections or severely unbalanced. Now, which is better, balanced or unbalanced? Well, it depends on the school. But when applying to a large number of schools, which by the way, most applicants do, a balanced score will open the most doors. But besides medical school preferences, here's another reason why you should be aiming for a balanced score in your prep. And it's a big one. It's easier to raise your total MCAT score by aiming for a balanced score. Think about this. What's easier to improve? A Chem Phys score from a 124 to a 126, or a Car score from a 129 to a 131? Well, the MCAT score distributions help us answer this question. Moving from a 124 to 126 involves moving from the 42nd percentile to the 64th percentile. Not easy by any means, but to improve from a 129 to a 131 would involve moving from the 95th percentile to the 99th. As seen in the score distribution, very few students score a 131 in Cars, which naturally implies that it's a difficult score to obtain. But why do so few students get a 131? Well, remember that the MCAT has questions that span the difficulty spectrum. This means that scoring a 131 requires the students to correctly answer the most difficult questions in that section, and that's a much harder task. Now that we've covered the scoring of the MCAT, let's talk about how to increase it. And this process starts by understanding the MCAT itself. It is a standardized test after all. Now, at the start of your prep, it's easy to think that the MCAT can ask you about literally anything. But that's not actually the case. Recall that we said the MCAT is a standardized test. So no matter the year in administration, the content of the exam needs to stay fairly consistent to accurately compare every test taker. That means there are limits on what the questions can ask about. And learning these limits is a crucial step as you prepare for your MCAT. So let's start our MCAT learnings with its major characteristics. As previously discussed, the MCAT has 4 sections. The MCAT is a multiple choice exam with each question having 4 answer choices. The MCAT is approximately 7.5 hours long, including breaks. And this time is split across the 4 sections of the MCAT, with the Chem Phys, Biochem, and Psych Soc sections each being 95 minutes long, and the Cars section being a bit shorter with only 90 minutes allotted. There are 3 breaks to separate each of the sections, 1 30-minute lunch break and 2 10-minute breaks. But there are specific things to consider in the Science and Cars sections. The science sections include Chem Phys, Biochem, and Psych Soc. Despite their different names, these 3 sections aim to test the same 4 scientific reasoning skills as outlined by the AAMC. Skill 1, knowledge of scientific concepts and principles, which is 35% of the questions. Skill 2, scientific reasoning and problem solving, which is 45% of the questions. Skill 3, reasoning about the design and execution of research, which makes up 10% of the questions. And Skill 4, database and statistical reasoning, which makes up the last 10% of questions. Some of these skills will immediately make sense as you've likely had exams in your career that tested them. For instance, Skill 1, testing your scientific knowledge, could describe most prerequisite pre-med courses or the written exam needed to get a driver's permit. The name of the game is regurgitating facts. Others, like Skills 2, 3, and 4, may be less familiar to you, but don't worry, you'll cover these skills in great detail in later lessons. Now, if you pause and really think about it, you might be asking yourself, how could a multiple choice question that's only a couple of sentences long really test one's understanding of something as complex as experimental design or scientific reasoning? And you'd be right, since assessing these skills with standalone questions is quite tough. What's the MCAT's solution to this problem? To incorporate passages and passage-based questions. MCAT passages are excerpts from books, articles, or papers that accompany questions. They provide the information, often in a complex way, that is needed to answer the associated questions. This allows for more complex questions that require test takers to interpret a large amount of information and combine it with general MCAT knowledge. Now, science passages can range from roughly 150 to 300 words, although there are a few examples of AAMC science passages being shorter than this. Science passages fall into two categories, informational and experimental. Informational passages are descriptive in nature, discussing a particular aspect of a concept. On the other hand, experimental passages are investigative in nature, using data to support a hypothesis or gain insight into a particular mechanism or disease. Both types of passages often have images associated with them, with informational passages more likely to have reactions and diagrams, whereas experimental passages are more likely to present data in figures or tables. Here's a look at a couple of each to get a sense of the structure of these types of passages. Let's start with informational passages. Notice that passages can exist with or without images, and when they do have images, they are relatively straightforward to understand. In the example, there are molecular structures and reactions. This screams organic chemistry to me. Our second example comes from the psych-social section. The start of each paragraph foreshadows that this passage reads like an essay. It starts by discussing an influential paper in 1962, then discusses the research since the 1960s up until now, and then finishes up by addressing despite advances in research, which tells us that this paragraph is going to touch on the gaps in the research and potential for future research. So just like that, in 10 seconds or less, we know that this informational passage has a lot of structure, and likely will be a straightforward read. Consider this a sneak peek into the Kaplan MCAT strategies you'll come across in upcoming lessons. Moving on, let's dive into some experimental passages. The biggest difference at a glance is the presence of data, either in the form of tables or graphs. In general, the essence of experimental passages is to present the data, explain the experiment that generated the data, and explore the findings that can be concluded from the data. Now, not all passages will do all these things. Oftentimes, MCAT passages will leave out pieces of information to set up for a research design question, which is skill 3, or a data analysis question, which is skill 4. After all, they can't ask you anything if they give you everything. Let's take a step back and shift from passage structure to section structure. Now, each of the science sections will have 10 passages with a total of 44 passage-based questions. That comes out to an average of 4.4 questions per passage. Historically, AAMC science passages can have between 4 to 6 questions. Interspersed between these 10 passages will be 4 sets of discrete questions for a total of 15 discrete or standalone questions. Now, these are not associated with the passage. This brings the total number of questions for each science section to 59. When considering the balance of passage-based questions to discrete questions, it leads to an interesting realization about the MCAT. 75% of questions in the science sections will be associated with the passage and are therefore likely to require more than just knowing scientific facts. So what does this mean? This won't be the last time we mention this. You can't memorize your way through the MCAT because so much of the information you'll need for test day will only be presented to you, well, on test day. And this means that the MCAT is a critical thinking exam as much as it's a content exam. So yes, you have to know your science, but you also need to know how to critically reason with it. Nowhere is the critical thinking aspect of the MCAT more prevalent than in the critical analysis and reasoning skills, or CARS section. This is the most unique section of the MCAT as it solely aims to test one's reading comprehension, critical reasoning, and for most students, their composure under pressure. Here's what you need to know about it. The CARS section contains 53 passage-based questions spread across 9 passages and 0 discrete questions. This lack of discrete questions makes sense given the section's focus on critical analysis and reasoning. In fact, the amount of outside content you'll need to know to answer these 53 questions is 0. All the information you'll need to answer these questions will be in the passages themselves, so it's essentially an open book test. CARS passages typically range from 500 to 600 words, although there have been instances where passages have been longer. The subject matter of these passages will either be from the humanities or the social sciences. So this means that CARS passages can discuss topics from literature, the arts, philosophy, religion, economics, history, political science, or even the history of politics. Ancient Greece, anyone? Now, you don't have to be an expert or even be knowledgeable about these topics. And that's a good thing, because that would probably be tougher than just getting a strong CARS score. Instead, you should aim to develop your critical reading skills and your critical reasoning skills to be able to handle the wide range of topics that CARS passages can span. Speaking of skills, the AAMC has created the CARS section to test very specific skills, which they call critical analysis and reasoning skills. Oh yeah, that's what CARS stands for, right? So despite any first impressions of CARS you may have had, just like the other MCAT sections, there are bounds on what questions can be asked in the CARS section. Every question you will encounter in CARS will test one of these 3 CARS skills. Foundations of comprehension. These questions will focus on understanding the basic components of the text while also focusing on the inferred meaning of the text. And they make up about 30% of the CARS questions. Reasoning within the text. These questions focus on reading between the lines, noting connections between different parts of the text, allowing you to recognize the arguments of the passage. These make up another 30% of the CARS questions. And reasoning beyond the text. These questions will present additional information and could ask you how it affects the statements in the passage. Or it could go the other way around and ask you how the new information is affected by the passage. Reasoning beyond the text questions are typically the most difficult and make up the remaining 40% of questions. For many, the CARS section is scary, intimidating, stressful, and many more might even use these words to describe the entire MCAT. For many, the CARS section is scary, make up the remaining 40%, or it could go the other way around, information and different parts of the text, allowing on the inferred meaning of the text. And they make up about 30% of the CARS questions. Reasoning within the text. These questions focus on reading between the lines, noting connections between different parts of the text, allowing you to recognize the arguments of the passage. These make up another 30% of the CARS questions. And reasoning beyond the text. These questions will present additional information and could ask you how it affects the statements in the passage. Or it could go the other way around and ask you how the new information is affected by the passage. Reasoning beyond the text questions are typically the most difficult and make up the remaining 40% of questions. For many, the CARS section is scary, intimidating, stressful, and many more might even use these words to describe the entire MCAT. So before we wrap up our decision on CARS and the MCAT as a whole, let's talk about the elephant in the room, difficulty. The MCAT is difficult, likely more difficult than any test you've taken so far, and it focuses on testing your reasoning skills more so than your content knowledge. And that's especially true for CARS, hence the intimidation. But here's the thing, MCAT skills can be taught and they definitely can be learned. They are not some abstract set of innate abilities that you either have or don't. Sure, some students have an easier time on the MCAT because they have already developed these skills. On the other hand, there are some who are just starting their development of these MCAT skills. So the MCAT seems difficult or maybe even impossible. But realize you've learned difficult skills before and some of them are really incredibly impressive. At one point, you didn't know how to read, but now you can. And what did it take? Time and practice. Turns out that's the same for the MCAT. So as the mystery of the MCAT starts to unravel, this is where your prep really begins. You may be asking yourself, it's just a science test. Don't I just need to know the content and I'll be fine? Granted, it's a lot of content, at least 2 years worth of courses. But even with that content in place, there's a few additional components that are important to consider when prepping for the MCAT. First, as you may have experienced with the baseline full length, the MCAT is really long. Knowing all of the content won't help if you're having a hard time focusing for a 7.5-hour test. Second, you may have experienced how dense many of the passages are, how tough it can be to determine what's important, and how confusing it can be to synthesize both the passage information and content background to successfully answer the questions. To further complicate things, the MCAT can combine different topics within one passage or even one question. This is likely different from how most students would have studied the sciences, which is typically taught in a compartmentalized manner. Physics principles are taught with other physics principles, while bioconcepts are taught with other bioconcepts. With these unique features of the MCAT in mind, it's no surprise that we as teachers know that even students who have an amazing base in content can still struggle with the MCAT. It's precisely because they're missing the strategies necessary to efficiently analyze text and answer questions. If you're struggling to see the connection between the rigor of the MCAT and your future career as a physician, consider this. Your patients will come to you with an absolute laundry list of symptoms. Headaches, trouble sleeping, hair falling out, unidentifiable pain in their abdomen, muscle pains, the list goes on, and it's your job to sort through that list, understanding that some, but not all of those symptoms will be pointing towards one possible issue. Then, taking your patient's information and coupled with your considerable background knowledge, you'll be able to order some tests, get even more in-depth information, and eventually treat your patient. This isn't an easy thing to do. There's a lot of problem solving and reasoning required to properly diagnose a patient. And the MCAT is making sure you have the required strategies and mindset before you get started with med school. Before we can speak on science passage strategy, we have to discuss passages in the science section. The presence of science passages themselves might be a new experience from any of your previous science classes. Most college classes use short answer and multiple choice questions in their assessments, but how many tests have required you to combine your science knowledge with new information given to you during the test? Probably not many, if any. So when students first encounter MCAT passages and their associated questions, it can be very disorienting. We often see students carefully and slowly read the passage, only to realize that they didn't retain or digest any of the information. Then when attacking questions, they struggle, not knowing whether the question is asking about background content, passage info, or both. If this sounds familiar, don't worry, but be glad it's happening now and not on test day. So how do we read more effectively to score points? That's where the Kaplan MCAT passage strategy comes in. First, let's speak towards the passages themselves. Science passages can come in a few different flavors, roughly divided into informational or experimental passage types. Informational passages are composed of text and can include reference tables, diagrams, or reactions like this one from the Chem-Phys section. Experimental passages like this one from the Biochem section require that in addition to reading through the text, you're summarizing the overall findings from the data found within tables or graphs. Given the different types of passages you'll see on test day, it's a good idea to have a few approaches to breaking down science passages on the MCAT. You'll learn more about how to use these methods in your strategy lessons, but for now, let's introduce you to the methods and terminology we use. Kaplan has 3 methods to break down, or distill as we like to call it, a passage. The methods differ by level of depth and analysis, weighing the investment of time and energy across the passages and questions. The highlighting method is great for informational passages that have fairly minimal text that's heavy on diagrams, and likely associated with questions that will take you a long time to work through. This Orgo passage in the Chem-Phys section is a good candidate for highlighting, as the bulk of the passage is dependent on the diagrams. The highlighting tool can be used to draw attention to a few key testable details that may be helpful for the questions. In addition, depending on your background, working through Orgo-heavy reaction mechanism questions may take you longer compared to other questions, so it might be wise to invest less time in the passage. Other good candidates for the highlighting method could be passages where you anticipate a lot of heavy calculation questions. The outlining method works great for dense informational passages with lots of details. Being able to group the information in each paragraph into your own words allows for some flexibility to describe relationships, using shorthand that makes sense to you. Paraphrasing the major takeaway of each paragraph in this behavioral science passage will help you answer questions associated with the passage like this one, given that you have a slightly deeper understanding of the passage without running the risk of a slightly associated with the passage. Paraphrasing using shorthand that makes information in each paragraph for dense informational passages with lots of details. Being able to group the information in each paragraph into your own words allows for some flexibility to describe relationships using shorthand that makes sense to you. Paraphrasing the major takeaway of each paragraph in this behavioral science passage will help you answer questions associated with the passage like this one, given that you have a slightly deeper understanding of the passage without running the risk of over-highlighting the dense material. The interrogation method is great for any experimental passages that contain at least one graph or table with data. As you might guess from the name, the interrogation method involves asking lots of questions, but the questions are centered around understanding the experimental setups and their accompanying data. To that end, notice that all of the interrogative questions in this set are focused on understanding the relationships between players in the two figures, rather than general questions about every detail in the passage. Then, once you get to the data, a good system for breaking it down is to identify the independent and dependent variables and the overall trend in the data. One big concern that students have is that this method takes a lot of time, and it's likely going to be the largest time investment out of all of the methods. However, the majority of the questions associated with a passage like this one will depend on the larger takeaways you generate from analyzing the data. So to balance the larger time investment, the questions will therefore move much faster. One thing to note before we move on is the difference between the tools you have access to on test day versus the distill methods themselves. You're welcome to write down a few notes or use the highlight function for any of the three methods. The methods, though, themselves are centered on how deep you read, not which tool you use. Now that you know about the methods, let's put it together into a comprehensive approach and discuss the Kaplan passage strategy. Preview, choose, read, and distill, or PCRD, which are the steps we use to break down the passage. Previewing the passage involves a quick 10 to 15 second glance at the entire passage, determining length, topic, information density, and presence of data. Based on your comfort level with the topic, you'll choose to do it now or later. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why bother? I have to do them all anyway. All questions are weighted equally on the test, but not all questions have the same value to you. If you spot a passage that you know will be tough for you, investing extra time in that passage is going to do two things. Steal time away from questions that you would likely get correct, and discourage you because it's more likely that you'll get these questions incorrect. In your upcoming strategy lessons, you'll learn more about how to implement this triaging strategy. From that quick preview of the passage, you'll also make your choice of method, whether you'll highlight, outline, or interrogate the passage. Once you've decided on a method, then you'll read the passage, keeping an eye out for keywords and science concepts to indicate the kinds of questions that can be asked. Finally, using the approach you chose, you distill down to the major takeaways for each part of the passage. While it does seem like the read and distill steps are separate, it's good to note that they are done simultaneously. You're reading and condensing the information down at the same time. Although passages are a huge part of the science sections, the payoff is really in the questions. So let's also briefly describe the steps you'll take to break them down. I don't know about you, but when I first found out that the MCAT was entirely composed of multiple choice questions, I let out a huge sigh of relief, since I had always found multiple choice questions so much easier than short answer or essay-based exams. However, while multiple choice questions can indeed be more straightforward because there are options, those very options can also make it challenging to answer. The test makers know exactly how to craft tempting wrong answers, so there is a strategic approach to answering multiple choice questions that's worth an introduction here. When breaking down questions, we type, rephrase, investigate, and match the question, also known as trim. Typing the question involves a quick glance at both the question stem and answer choices to identify topic and relative difficulty level for you. Like with the preview step for passages, you'll make a decision to do this now or later. Then rephrase the question stem so that you're really getting into the heart of what the question is asking. Investigate involves doing the legwork to determine how to answer it. What do you need to recall from your content background? What info from the passage is related to this question? What do the answer choices tell you about how to structure your approach? Put this all together to generate a prediction about the correct answer. This step is absolutely crucial to help avoid getting trapped by well-crafted wrong answers, like I mentioned earlier. Additionally, matching to a predicted answer also helps to save a lot of time. Debating the merits of a few remaining answer choices can take a lot of time, which can be avoided by generating a prediction first before analyzing the answers. You may feel a little silly at first about making a prediction when the answer is sitting right there, and it can be discouraging when your prediction is wildly off from any of the answer choices. However, like any skill, the more you practice, the better your accuracy, and soon you'll be thinking just like a test maker. Now, not all questions will allow for a direct match, and it's also possible that your prediction isn't specific enough to narrow down to just one answer. But investing a little active thinking before analyzing the answers will do wonders for both timing and accuracy. In addition to the trim question strategy, it's important to note that the AAMC has ascribed skills to science questions. About 35% of all science questions are Skill 1, which tests your knowledge about scientific facts. These kinds of questions are likely what you had in mind when you first learned that the MCAT is a science test. Take a look at this example question that asks about the identity of the functional group formed when two amino acids are bound together through a peptide bond. Generally speaking, recalling the specific facts about a concept or idea is enough to answer these questions correctly. Almost half the questions you'll encounter in the science section are Skill 2 or reasoning questions. Skill 2 questions are the next step beyond Skill 1 and will take science content as well as additional information from the question stem and passage to solve a specific problem. In this example Skill 2 behavioral science question, it asks you to make a prediction based on your knowledge of cultural capital. So knowing the definition of cultural capital is a big component of this question, but then you have to apply that knowledge to get the question right. Skill 3 questions make up about 10% of science questions and are therefore proportionally smaller compared to Skill 1 and Skill 2. Skill 3 problems will ask you to understand how experiments are designed, how hypotheses are tested, and the various techniques and tools used by scientists. These research design questions can almost be considered an extension of one of the passage distill approaches, the interrogation method for experiments. So while they are a smaller slice of the science question pie, the skill is absolutely integral to analyzing experimental passages. Take a look at this biochemistry skill 3 question asking about the role of SDS in gel electrophoresis. These kinds of questions are very often the how of experiments. How are the elements used in experiments to address the research question? Finally, Skill 4 or data analysis questions make up the final 10% of questions. Like Skill 3, it would be easy to dismiss their contribution, but the same justification for practicing these kinds of questions also applies. Taking the time to break down the data while interrogating experimental passages will make these Skill 4 questions a slam dunk. This sample question on the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve requires that you're able to use the data provided to explain a property about hemoglobin. While it's possible to get Skill 3 and 4 questions associated with passages that are informational, it's much more likely to occur with experimental passages, hence why it's a good idea to get an understanding about the passage before moving on to the questions. Now, understanding the AMC's 4 science skills is a crucial stepping stone in learning how to handle every single science question on test day. This is because even the most difficult and confusing questions will fall into one of these skills. The MCAT is a standardized test after all, and by learning the patterns of the test, you can make sure that when you encounter that difficult question, you'll be able to leverage the experience you gained from the hundreds, if not thousands, of similar questions you'll have completed on your MCAT journey for that final performance on test day. As we wrap up this intro to Kaplan science strategies, let me pose to you a final scenario that might be familiar. If you've tried your hand at some MCAT practice like your baseline and are in the process of reviewing the results, you can likely follow along with the explanation and generally understand the concept being tested. However, maybe you're puzzled as to how you know you should go to that part of the passage, recall this fact from your background knowledge, or pay attention to this specific part of the question stem. By breaking down the passage and question systematically using these strategies, you can identify the steps that you may be subconsciously skipping or rushing, and also identify the areas that need more work. Look ahead to your strategy lessons to really dig into the specifics on how to implement them as you embark on your MCAT studying journey. Most standardized tests have some form of reading comprehension, but the AMC was very deliberate when renaming the verbal section on the MCAT as CARS, or Critical Analysis and Reasoning Skills. This section focuses less on understanding the nitty-gritty nuances of the plot than is typically expected in reading comprehension passages. Instead, the CARS section focuses on being able to break down a passage based on its structure and using this as a guide to determine what would logically follow. There are 3 important things to remember with the CARS section. 1, this is the one section that is truly an open book test. You don't have to come in with any outside knowledge of literature or the humanities. All of the information you'll need to get every question right is located in the passages. 2, everyone has the ability to do well on the CARS section, no matter their background. Just like its name implies, it's a set of skills that can be acquired through practice and dedication. And 3, it involves a strategic framework that can be applied every single time. Normally, most issues on the CARS section are due to time constraints or the way we read each passage. With only 90 minutes to read 9 passages and answer 53 questions, there's no way that we can read every passage as if it were a science textbook. By that, I mean trying to memorize and understand every single word, phrase, and sentence as you go. That's why we've come up with 2 specific strategies to help make the CARS section more digestible. One that focuses on the passages, and another that focuses on the questions. We use the steps preview, choose, read, and distill, or PCRD, to break down the passages. You may have heard these terms before. They're the same steps we take for the science passages. By following this series of steps, we give you a framework to approach every passage on the CARS section, no matter how intimidating it may look. And more importantly, working through these steps can help you identify what you need to work on most. In this first step, previewing the passage involves looking for patterns in how the passage is written. Remember, in order to make this exam standardized for everyone at every single administration, the writers of the MCAT need to compose passages that follow very specific structures in presenting information across different genres. These patterns might include information dumps, throwing chunks of dense details at you, historical timelines, giving you the exact breakdown of what happened when with some facts sprinkled in to fluff it up, particular points of views narrating the passage, which really boils down to determining who's talking, the author or some all-knowing outside narrator. The presence of arguments or opinions to spice things up, some form of storytelling which gives you different flavors of sass, drama, or gossip involved, and well, a lot more that you'll explore as you go through the course. Knowing what these patterns are will help you decide which passages you call difficult as you start to triage in the previous step. In essence, triaging relies on your understanding of your own personal strengths and weaknesses to decide whether or not the passage is something you'll do now or later. Remember, the CARS section is super tight when it comes to timing, so saving the hardest passages for last ensures you score points on questions that you know you can get right. CARS passages can be some of the most dense excerpts of text you'll see, and staying focused can be a challenge. Having a solid plan to organize the important information from a CARS passage allows you to get the testable information without getting overwhelmed by extraneous material. We've boiled this process down to 3 specific methods: highlighting, outlining, and interrogating. In the choose step, we get to decide which method we want to use. Each of these methods is meant to help you organize your thoughts based on how the passages are structured, and more importantly, based on your own personal comfort with each type of passage. Highlighting works really well when passages are tougher to read with a lot of dense or confusing information. In this method, skim the paragraph and highlight only the big ideas. We're interested in words that signal the general topic, opinion given, or hint at the direction of where the author is trying to take us. It's important to emphasize that in this method, we're not highlighting facts or details. This is just fluff, and I like fluff in my pillows and sandwiches, not on my MCAT. Now, you might have heard this from us before, but one of our amazing MCAT teachers summed up the purpose of highlighting perfectly. You're doing it for your eyes, not your brain. What we mean by that is when you go back to review the passage, your highlights should not be huge chunks of text. They should be words or short phrases that help you trace what is happening in the passage when. Outlining works really well for information-heavy passages that may include a very obvious structure, such as a chronological story or a logical argument. These are typically more medium in difficulty and may require a bit more time to work through the flow of the passage. When we outline, we still focus on the main ideas and turning points. But now we get to put it into our own words by summing up each paragraph in a short paraphrase that lives on our noteboard. These notes are meant to be brief, capturing the general point being discussed in that paragraph. And remember, you should find every opportunity to save time when it comes to taking these notes. Don't be shy about using shorthand that makes sense to you. I personally use abbreviations, arrows, and emojis to keep things spicy because, let's be real, some of these passages can get a bit dry. The strength of this method comes from the act of paraphrasing, which forces you to synthesize the main idea at regular points in the passage. This helps you build a deeper layer of understanding, and as a bonus, by the end of the passage, you'll have an outline of its major points and where to find them on your noteboard to refer back to while answering questions. The interrogation method is most effective on straightforward passages that you already feel comfortable reading. As its name implies, this is where we actively ask ourselves questions to drive us forward as we read. These questions can include, why did the author say that? How does this piece of text connect to what came before it? What's going to happen next? How does this prove or disprove the author's point? This may sound strange, but you've interrogated readings before. It's actually a subconscious part of how we read. Anytime you've read a book or paper that made you take a step back and go, followed by a question, you've interrogated. With the Kaplan interrogation method, we want to make this behavior a conscious part of your reading. When we're actively asking ourselves questions, we remain focused while gaining a deeper understanding of the passage. This method can be quite time-consuming, which is why we like to save it for more straightforward passages. Now we want to take a step back and emphasize that the choose step and the choices you make are dynamic. We're not asking you to choose one method for all CARS passages, nor will you always choose the same way. As you gain experience with what does and doesn't work for you and your perception of the passages, you'll eventually find a good balance for the kinds of passages that are best suited for each of the 3 distill methods. Just remember that difficulty is all relative. We all come from different backgrounds and have different experiences when it comes to reading, so it's important that you experiment with these 3 approaches to find the recipe that is just right for you. Reading in CARS is likely going to be quite different compared to how you read novels, fun internet articles, or even pieces of scientific writing. That's because, in general, we primarily read information for the what. However, the majority of questions associated with CARS passages don't ask about the what. CARS questions focus more on the how and why. That is, the connections between ideas, the structure of arguments, the general flow of the passage, and the author's tone and intentions. The best tool we can use to start really digging into this style of reading is keywords. You'll learn about this more in your strategy lessons, but to illustrate its usefulness, let me present to you a paragraph from a CARS passage from AMC CARS Question Pack 2. Feel free to pause the video and get a quick preview of the paragraph. Oof, words like scientific research, quantum mechanics, and behavioristic psychology quickly make this paragraph seem very hard. My first thought was, what are they trying to say? It's easy to become overwhelmed and panic trying to understand every single thing in each sentence. However, let me show you how a CARS expert would use keyword analysis to help make sense of each sentence. From the get-go, we have this beautiful contrast keyword but. It signals 2 things. The first is its more direct purpose as a transition word. It's a sign that this first sentence is going against what came before it. In this sentence, we learn that a perspective or worldview doesn't always fall apart if science doesn't support it. The but implies that before this sentence, maybe there was an example that did showcase how an idea was disproven with scientific evidence. The second is that we now know the author's stance on worldviews and their relationships to scientific research traditions. They won't always crumble. This next sentence starts with another contrast phrase, to the contrary. Remember, the previous sentence told us the author's opinion, so by repeating another contrasting phrase, they are actually emphasizing their most important ideas. This is amazing in 2 ways. First, even though this sentence is kind of tough to understand, it's okay, we have context from sentence 1, so positivistic, I'll come back to it if I need to. Second, we already have a good idea what the author is building towards in their story. In the third sentence, the author brings up the history of science to show examples that support the same statement in sentence 1. Okay, author, we get it, scientific evidence can't make worldviews disappear. Now look at the starting phrase of sentence 4. The evidence keyword, for instance, lets us know immediately that there is no new idea here. The author is still bringing up evidence for the same argument, telling us that quantum mechanics and behavioristic psychology, examples of scientific disciplines, haven't changed people's beliefs. These worldviews still exist. The final sentence now spells it out for us. It reinforces yet again the author's point, elaborating on how specifically with quantum mechanics and behaviorism, people's ideas don't really change in the face of scientific evidence. Can you see the structural skeleton? We use keywords to pick it apart, only to realize that instead of many different ideas within this seemingly dense paragraph, it's really just saying one claim over and over. Why? Are authors trying to adhere to some sort of word count? Probably not. CARS passages are excerpts of larger pieces of literature. The author here is making sure that their big argument is supported with lots of evidence, which is absolutely a bonus for us CARS analyzers because this is where we can leverage our last step, the distill methods. Now that we've discussed how to break down the meaning of the text as we read, let's talk about how we can distill down to the most important ideas. Earlier, when we discussed the choose step, we described how the distill method differs by level of depth, and how you choose which method to use based on your perception of the passage's difficulty. Let's start with the interrogation method, which is where you go deep into the passage by asking questions. This method can seem challenging at first, but think about having a conversation with a friend about a topic they're really interested in that you might not know much about. To demonstrate, we're going to use that same paragraph from earlier. When interrogating, read until there's a change or shift in ideas. For me, I think this first bit up until quantum mechanics seems to be talking about the same stuff. We call these groups of sentences chunks. And generally speaking, interrogative questions ask how do things connect or why is this included. For instance, I could ask how this chunk connects to the previous paragraph, which we can't see, but using keywords, I know this is contrasting to some idea that preceded this paragraph. Notice the interrogation isn't really focusing on the content of the paragraph as much as the structure. Another good question to ask is what the author thinks about this bold claim that they make about stubborn perspectives. This is a little subtle, but phrases like remarkable resilience maybe gives a hint of a positive tone, which is definitely worth noting. Okay, let's do the same thing now with the second chunk. Here, we could ask ourselves about the connection to what's coming up next. Maybe the author will continue the same idea, or perhaps they head back to their earlier idea about how science can change perspectives. In short, interrogative reading is the essence of critical reading, and even if it's not the method you're comfortable with initially, interrogation builds the best level of analysis for a CARS passage to prepare you for the questions. If you thought this was cool here, be ready to have your mind blown away as we dig deeper into how to do this in your strategy lessons. Next down in the level of analysis is the outlining method. Here, we're going to see how those keywords will help us paraphrase into some simple shorthand that's quick to jot down on your noteboard. We're going to use that same quantum mechanic passage from before to directly compare and contrast how an outline of this paragraph will differ from our earlier interrogation. For the outlining method, you'll generally want to read through the entire paragraph first, then pause and think about the big idea. It's important to wait until the end of the paragraph so that you can avoid taking notes on each individual sentence. Let yourself process the entire paragraph, then hone in on the key point. In this example, we saw from the jot down on your notebook method. Here, we're going to chunk idea, or perhaps they head back to their earlier idea about how science can change perspectives. In short, interrogative reading is the essence of critical reading, and even if it's not the method you're comfortable with initially about stubborn perspective. It's a little subtle, but phrase gives a hint of a second chunk ourselves about the we'll continue the same idea. Or perhaps they head back to their earlier idea about how science can change perspectives. In short, interrogative reading is the essence of critical reading, and even if it's not the method you're comfortable with initially, interrogation builds the best level of analysis for a CARS passage to prepare you for the questions. If you thought this was cool here, be ready to have your mind blown away as we dig deeper into how to do this in your strategy lessons. Next down in the level of analysis is the outlining method. Here, we're going to see how those keywords will help us paraphrase into some simple shorthand that's quick to jot down on your noteboard. We're going to use that same quantum mechanic passage from before to directly compare and contrast how an outline of this paragraph will differ from our earlier interrogation. For the outlining method, you'll generally want to read through the entire paragraph first, then pause and think about the big idea. It's important to wait until the end of the paragraph so that you can avoid taking notes on each individual sentence. Let yourself process the entire paragraph, then hone in on the key point. In this example, we saw from the keywords that the author is mostly referring to one theme about people clinging to familiar ideas, even in the face of contrary scientific evidence, which is what I use in the outline for this paragraph. Notice a few things. It's succinct, uses shorthand, and doesn't include a lot of specifics. Also notice how it's more superficial compared to the interrogation we did earlier. This is okay because we'll have more time to go back and dig through the paragraph if we need to for a question. The most superficial level of analysis is the highlighting method. In this method, you'll still use the keywords to chunk ideas together, but focus way less on what most of the chunk is saying. For instance, I would read the first sentence, understand the big point, then realize that each successive sentence is just building on that initial sentence. This will let me zoom through this entire paragraph quite quickly, and instead of paraphrasing after you read a paragraph, you'll pick out a phrase that best represents what you read. For me, the phrase right in the middle of this paragraph does a good job of representing the big takeaway about how views stick around even if scientific theories challenge them. You may choose something different, and that's okay. Don't overthink this part of the strategy. This may be quite different from the way we highlight textbooks when we're trying to study. We often highlight while we read to stay active on what's happening. The difference on the MCAT is that we want to highlight after we read, not during, so that we don't end up with an entire chunk of yellow on screen. Again, we don't expect you to perfect this method right here, right now. That's what we'll do in the rest of your strategy lessons. Now, we can't forget the reason why we're even reading and distilling CARS passages, to score points through answering questions. So of course, we have a strategy for this. We use the trim method for questions. Type, rephrase, investigate, and match. To illustrate how to use this strategy, let's use a question from the same quantum mechanics paragraph from earlier. Typing involves a glance at the question stem, but no peeking at the answers. These answers will really only distract you, so focus on the question stem. Taking a look at this question, we find that it's asking about how the author would characterize quantum mechanics, which allows us to get two pieces of info, the question type and whether we want to do this question now or come back to it. First, it's asking about the content in the paragraph. So this is a foundation of comprehension question, specifically an inference question. Since we know exactly where we need to go, this is a question that I would do right away. During the rephrase step, we put the question into our own words. Knowing that it's an inference question allows us to rephrase this quite quickly. What must be true about quantum mechanics? This rephrase step might seem tedious, but it makes sure that we are clear on what the question is asking before considering the answers. This step is so important because the question stem is arguably the most important part of the test. If you don't know what the question is asking, it doesn't matter how well you know the passage or the answer choices. You may still end up answering the wrong question. It doesn't feel so great when you realize that you picked an answer that sounded great, but it didn't actually answer the question that was asked. Investigating the question involves going back into the passage as necessary and generating a prediction. Quantum mechanics was a big feature of the second half. It was used as an example, along with behaviorism, of the kind of science that goes against the worldviews of people. Note that this is exactly the kind of connection we already made when distilling this through the interrogation method. So this question can be pretty quick, whereas if I had highlighted or even outlined this passage, I would probably need to read the passage a couple more times to come up with the prediction. Finally, keeping the prediction in mind, match to the correct answer, which is B. Notice a few things about that answer. It's very close to our prediction. It's also much faster to get to the answer instead of debating the merits about the other answer choices. And while we can't guarantee that you'll have awesome predictions every time, the more you practice actively thinking about the answer, the better your predictions will get. If you think about it, the CARS section on the MCAT is really just a patient that we're diagnosing and treating. You'll have awesome predictions every time, the more you practice actively thinking about the answer, the better your predictions will get. If you think about it, the CARS section on the MCAT is really instead of debating the merits about the other answer choices. And while we can't guarantee that you'll have awesome predictions every time, the more you practice actively thinking about the answer. All these strategies will seem MCAT specific.
As you begin your MCAT journey, it's incredibly common to feel daunted by how much content there is to get through. It inevitably raises the question of where and how to start. But that's what Kaplan is here for. We've designed our curriculum to help you tackle all that content, as well as many of the other challenges you may face while preparing for your exam. It all begins with the content refresher phase. The content refresher phase of the curriculum is characterized by assignments that we call content refresher modules. These modules are the tiles that show up in your study plan. When you click on one of the tiles, it shows you the specific tasks, which will include a pre-quiz, one or more content refresher videos related to the subject of the module, and a post-quiz. The time spent to complete any given module can vary, but in general, you should be able to get through a few in a 3-hour study block. One of the first things many students notice about these modules in their study plan is that they jump between subject areas, moving between physics and psychology, biology and chemistry, and back again. This is not a mistake. The order of the modules has been carefully designed using a learning science concept called interleaving. This model of mixing subjects has been proven to be more effective in promoting long-term retention and understanding. The modules themselves are composed of what we like to call study sandwiches. Each module begins with a pre-quiz. To use some psych social terminology, the manifest or obvious function is to evaluate your starting point. Do you need to review this module, or do you know this already? But the latent, or less obvious but still beneficial function, is to prime you for the content review itself. Following the pre-quiz, there will sometimes be one content refresher video, but far more often there will be 2 or more videos. We call these content refresher videos because that is their purpose. They're refresher videos, meant to review the most essential content on the MCAT. After the videos is the post-quiz, which provides an opportunity to think about and use what you just reviewed in the videos. Overall, this study sandwich with practice, review, then additional practice is a powerful and delicious review structure for promoting learning. Of course, not all learners are the same. While the MCAT is a standardized test, evaluating from the same pool of content, you certainly have different areas of strength and areas of opportunity for growth than another student might. Study time is a precious resource, so the pre-quizzes give you the opportunity to test out of a module. If you can already score well on the pre-quiz because a topic is an area of strength for you, it doesn't really make sense to use your precious study time to further review that subject. So instead, you test out of the module and move on. It's important to go into this phase with the right goals. First and foremost, the content refresher phase is meant to refresh your familiarity with content by giving you fresh exposure to topics you may not have seen in years. The goal should not be mastery of a topic from watching 1 or 2 videos. The MCAT is a marathon, not a sprint. This means while watching the refresher videos, it's important that you mentally engage with them. Think about the problems and concepts that are being presented. For many students, this is shocking advice, but don't worry about taking extensive notes on the videos. Note-taking leads to focusing on what to write down and can distract you from actually thinking about the ideas in the video. You'll always have access to the video if you need to go back and watch something again. If you need to check a concept from the video to confirm your understanding, that's when you can turn to your Kaplan review books. They should be considered reference material, not reading material. The books are great resources, but the content refresher phase is not the point in your studies to be spending a significant amount of time reading. One important thing to keep in mind during this phase is that these modules are not meant to be the place where you learn something and then your learning of that thing is over. In fact, we fully anticipate that you will get many questions wrong on not only the pre-quizzes, but also on the post-quizzes, even after viewing the videos. The post-quizzes are there to give you an opportunity to apply the content, not to check that you have mastered it. In fact, getting questions wrong and reviewing them in those post-quizzes is one more opportunity to enhance your learning. They are part of the learning process, not final assessments. Follow your study plan and move ahead to your first content refresher modules. At this point, you've learned about your
Oh, just So this is
It's time for everyone's favorite game. Name that amino acid. Let's get started with some clues to give you a hand. Show us what's behind door number 1. Ooh, the mystery amino acid is chiral. Okay, door number 2. Mystery amino acid has a nitrogen in the side chain. Final clue, door number 3. The mystery amino acid has an isoelectric point of 7.6. In this video, we'll uncover the characteristics that are common to all 20 proteinogenic amino acids and discover the specifics so that you're able to confidently identify this mystery amino acid. Let's start with what makes an amino acid an amino acid. The name itself tells us so much. There's an amine on the far left, a carboxylic acid on the far right, and joining the two functional groups together is the alpha carbon. The alpha carbon has a hydrogen and a unique R group, also known as the side chain. The R group is what makes each amino acid distinct. One of the ways to classify amino acids is to group them by similar characteristics, like polarity. You'll see in a bit that there are side chains that are purely nonpolar. They're only composed of carbons and hydrogens. And then you'll get side chains that are really polar. They have a charge on their side chain. The rest don't fall neatly into one category or another. Polarity isn't a yes-no box that you check off, but a gradient. You'll see shortly how some amino acids will be more polar than the hydrocarbon side chains, but less polar than the charged amino acids. Another characteristic of amino acids to note is their charge. Currently on screen, this generic amino acid carries no charge. However, carboxylic acids have a relatively low pKa, and the proton will dissociate at physiological pH, creating a negatively charged carboxylate. Amines have a relatively high pKa, will accept a proton and act as a base at physiological pH, and will be positively charged. Hence, amino acids are often called dipolar ions. Since most of the time we're considering how these amino acids behave in biological systems, it's important to consider what they would look like in our bodies. Here's another view of our generic amino acid, this time in a Fisher projection. All of the 20 proteinogenic amino acids are L amino acids, and we know it's L because the highest priority group is pointing to the left in a Fisher projection. We can also explore another property of amino acids, the chirality. 19 out of 20 proteinogenic amino acids are also chiral. One of the amino acids, glycine, which we'll discuss in a bit, has a hydrogen for the R group. Recall that a chiral center has 4 different groups attached. This means that our first clue, the fact that the amino acid is chiral, isn't the most useful clue, since it only eliminates glycine from the running. Why do we care about amino acids? Because they're the building blocks to what are really important, proteins. Amino acids join together when the nitrogen of the backbone of one amino acid nucleophilically attacks the backbone carbonyl carbon of another amino acid. The resulting bond is commonly called a peptide bond, but it's functionally an amide group. This repeats over and over in our bodies using ribosomes to help place and catalyze the creation of the peptide bonds. Amides have one feature that is very important to a peptide bond. The lone pair on the nitrogen in an amide participates in resonance to create a partial double bond between the carbonyl carbon and nitrogen. This creates structural stability within the protein chain. For each amino acid, you'll want to know a few key facts: the 3-letter and 1-letter codes, the structure, and any special properties that the side chain confers. Let's start with what we left off with, glycine. Also known by the 3-letter code GLY and the 1-letter code G, it is the simplest of all amino acids, like we mentioned before. Since it has a side chain that's just a hydrogen, it is the only one of the 20 proteinogenic amino acids that has an achiral alpha carbon. There's one more unique amino acid we'll mention here. That's proline. 3-letter code PRO, 1-letter code P. The interesting thing about proline is that the side chain coming off the alpha carbon is attached on the other end to the nitrogen of the backbone. This creates what is known as a cis amino acid, which creates kinks when proline is included in the middle of a secondary structural element, like an alpha helix. It's also commonly found in tight turns that link secondary structural elements. These two amino acids are what we can call the misfits of the amino acid world. Next, we're going to consider a set of amino acids whose side chains are composed purely of carbons and hydrogens. The simplest of these is alanine, 3-letter code ALA, 1-letter code A. The R group for alanine is just a methyl group. Adding a carbon to the alpha carbon also introduces another bit of terminology, the beta carbon. All amino acids other than glycine will have a beta carbon. If we were to add a V of carbons to that beta carbon, we'd create valine. 3-letter code is VAL, 1-letter code V. The amino acid leucine is just adding one more methyl group to the chain before it splits into the V. 3-letter code LEU, 1-letter code L. The last of the branched alkyl amino acids is isoleucine. The name gives you a clue. Iso means it's an isomer of leucine, so it has the same number of carbons and hydrogens. It looks very much like the V in valine, just with an extra methyl group on one end. 3-letter code is ILE, 1-letter code I. All four of these amino acids, alanine, valine, leucine, isoleucine, have side chains that are purely hydrophobic. Now, there's one more amino acid that has an R group composed purely of carbons and hydrogens, but it's commonly seen grouped with other amino acids because it has another interesting property, aromaticity. This is phenylalanine, 3-letter code PHE, 1-letter code F. The name itself helps you with the structure. Start with a methyl group, like in alanine, then add a phenyl group. If we take phenylalanine and add an OH group to create phenol, we create our next amino acid, tyrosine. 3-letter code TYR, 1-letter code Y. Now, in terms of properties, an aromatic ring is nonpolar, whereas an alcohol is pretty polar. You'll notice something about many amino acids. Most of them don't fall neatly into a purely hydrophobic or hydrophilic category. Instead, most amino acid side chains are on a gradient. Tyrosine, for example, is slightly more nonpolar than polar, since the aromaticity of the benzene ring does pull electron density away from the oxygen. Another amino acid that is aromatic is tryptophan. 3-letter code TRP, 1-letter code W. It has one of the largest side chains, a 5-membered ring with a nitrogen attached to a phenyl group. Now, there is one more amino acid that has an aromatic side chain, and that's histidine. But we'll discuss that amino acid in a different grouping, as it's more aromatic side ring with an aromatic does pull electron density away from the oxygen. Another amino acid that is aromatic is tryptophan. 3-letter code TRP, 1-letter code W. It has one of the largest side chains, a 5-membered ring with a nitrogen attached to a phenyl group. Now, there is one more amino acid that has an aromatic side chain, and that's histidine. But we'll discuss that amino acid in W. It has one of the largest side chains, a 5-membered ring with a nitrogen attached to a phenyl group. Now, there is one more amino acid that has an aromatic side chain, and that's histidine. But we'll discuss that amino acid in a different grouping, as it's more commonly known by a different characteristic. One more final amino acid to round out the grouping of hydrophobic side chains, and that's methionine. Five-membered ring with a nitrogen attached to a phenyl group. Now, there is one more amino acid that has an aromatic side chain, a 5-membered ring with a nitrogen attached to a phenyl group. Now, there is one more amino acid that has an aromatic side chain, and that's histidine. But we'll discuss that amino acid in a different grouping, as it's more commonly known by a different characteristic. One more final amino acid to round out the grouping of hydrophobic side chains, and that's methionine. 3-letter code MET, 1-letter code M. Methionine has a few interesting properties. First, methionine is found at the beginning of most proteins. This is because methionine also serves as a signal to indicate that protein synthesis is beginning at this part of the mRNA sequence. The codon that codes for methionine is AUG, which is also known as the start codon. Second, this is one of two amino acids with a sulfur in the side chain. The sulfur in methionine is flanked by carbons on either side, which tend to cancel out any polarity conferred by the sulfur, making the side chain mostly hydrophobic. Now, if you recall back to our mystery amino acid, we were told that clue number 2 was that it had a nitrogen in the side chain. So we do have a possibility here with tryptophan. However, we'll have to keep looking to see if there are any other amino acids with nitrogen in the side chain, as well as dig more into clue 3. Next up, we're going to briefly describe a set of amino acids with side chains that are hydrophilic but uncharged at physiological pH. First up, we have serine, which is really just an alanine with an OH group added. 3-letter code SER, 1-letter code S. The OH, or alcohol, attached to a methyl group means that the side chain of this group would happily play in water. If I add a methyl group to the beta carbon of serine, we get threonine. 3-letter code THR, 1-letter code T. Given the small change, it shouldn't be surprising that this amino acid has the same properties as serine. It's hydrophilic. There's an extremely common post-translational modification made primarily on amino acids with alcohols, and that's phosphorylation. The oxygen undergoes a nucleophilic attack on the last phosphate of ATP, also known as the gamma phosphate. This addition changes the properties of the alcohol. Instead of being uncharged and polar, it's now negatively charged. This drastic change in property acts as an important signal for many proteins. You may recall that there's a third amino acid already mentioned that had an alcohol on the side chain, tyrosine. All three amino acids, serine, threonine, and tyrosine, can be phosphorylated. Another amazingly similar amino acid to serine is cysteine. The oxygen in the side chain is replaced with a sulfur. Since sulfur is lower on the periodic table, it is also less electronegative, and so is less hydrophilic compared to serine. This is also the only amino acid other than methionine with a sulfur in the side chain. While cysteine is not normally phosphorylated, it has another really interesting property. If you put two cysteine side chains close together in an oxidizing environment, it forms a disulfide bond, which is a covalent link between two sulfur atoms. Disulfide bonds play an important role in tertiary and quaternary structure of proteins, which is covered in a different video. Next up, we have two amino acids with amides on their side chains. Asparagine is an amide attached to a beta carbon. 3-letter code ASN, 1-letter code N. Glutamine is almost the same as asparagine, but with one more carbon in the side chain before ending with the amide. 3-letter code GLN, 1-letter code Q. Both glutamine and asparagine are hydrophilic in nature. We've got a few more candidates for our mystery amino acids. Both asparagine and glutamine have nitrogens in the side chain, which makes that third clue even more important. We've got our code GLN. N, 1-letter code Q. Both glutamine and asparagine are hydrophilic in nature. We've got a few more candidates for our mystery amino acids. Both asparagine and glutamine have nitrogens in the side chain, which makes that third clue even more important. The last set of amino acids are the ones that can be found with charged side chains. Acidic amino acids are ones with side chains that readily dissociate to form a negative charge. This includes both aspartic acid and glutamic acid. At physiological pH, the carboxylic acid in both side chains is deprotonated and negatively charged, which is why we commonly call these amino acids aspartate and glutamate. The ATE ending indicates the deprotonated form of an acid. Aspartic acid is known by its 3-letter code ASP, 1-letter code D. It very closely resembles asparagine. We just swapped out the nitrogen with an alcohol, forming a carboxylic acid. We can do the same thing with glutamic acid, 3-letter code GLU, 1-letter code E. It also resembles glutamine, replacing the same amine with an OH group. Next, we'll consider the basic amino acids, meaning they are able to accept a proton on their side chain, making that side chain positively charged. First up is lysine, which is a long alkyl chain that's capped with an amine. At physiological pH, the amine is protonated and positively charged. 3-letter code LYS, 1-letter code K. The second basic amino acid is arginine. 3-letter code ARG, 1-letter code R. It also has a long alkyl chain, but is capped by an unusual functional group called a guanidino. One of the nitrogens at physiological pH is protonated and positively charged. The last amino acid of the set is histidine. 3-letter code HIS, 1-letter code H. It has a few very interesting properties. First, the side chain is an imidazole ring, which is aromatic. Second, one of the nitrogens in the imidazole ring has the capability of accepting a proton and becoming positively charged, hence why it's classified along with arginine and lysine as a base. However, the pKa of the nitrogen is around 6.5, and so remains neutral and uncharged in physiological conditions, because that is below physiological pH. Having reviewed all 20 proteinogenic amino acids, we can add 3 more to our list of candidates for the mystery amino acid. Along with tryptophan, glutamine, and asparagine, there's also lysine, arginine, and histidine. Perhaps clue number 2 wasn't super useful after all. One last detail to wrap up. Recall back to the beginning when we mentioned the third clue. Our mystery amino acid has an isoelectric point of 7.6. An isoelectric point is the pH at which the greatest concentration of the compound may carry a charge, but with the net charge of 0. For a molecule to have a pi must mean that the compound has at least 2 ionizable groups. Since all amino acids have at least the backbone amine and carboxylic acids, they will also have an isoelectric point. Let's use alanine as an example. It has 2 ionizable groups, the backbone amine and the backbone carboxylic acid. At physiological pH, the amine is protonated and the carboxylic acid is deprotonated. When the pH dips below 2.3, the carboxylic acid regains its proton and loses its charge. The fully protonated form of alanine has a +1 charge. On the other side, when the pH is greater than 9.7, the amine donates its proton and loses the positive charge. The fully deprotonated form of alanine has a -1 charge. The form in the middle that has a net charge of 0 is called the zwitterion. To calculate the isoelectric point, take the average of the 2 pKa's that flank the zwitterion. In this case, an average of 2.3 and 9.7 gives us a pi for alanine of 6.0. Now, since all of the backbone carboxyl and amine groups will have roughly the same pKa, it means that all amino acids that have only those 2 ionizable groups will have roughly the same pi. And while a pi of 7.6 seems kind of in the same neighborhood, it's not close enough, indicating that the side chain of our mystery amino acid is ionizable. Out of the 6 amino acids with nitrogen in the side chain, 3 of them, asparagine, glutamine, and tryptophan, do not have ionizable side chains, and so they're out of the running. Let's take a closer look at lysine. Since the side chain of lysine is ionizable, it means that we can have 4 possible forms. The third molecule is the zwitterion of lysine, since the charges add up to 0. Essentially, all will be the zwitterion at the isoelectric point. As the pH moves down, more become protonated and positive. As the pH moves up, fewer are protonated, so they're negative. That's much higher than our mystery amino acid with its pi of 7.6. Arginine's pi can be calculated very similarly. The zwitterion form is also the third in the series. The average of the 2 pKa's gives us a pi of 10.8, slightly higher than lysine, since the guanidino group has a higher pKa. That means that lysine and arginine are not our mystery amino acid. We're left with the last amino acid, histidine. Same as with the other 2 amino acids, the zwitterion form is the third in the series. Averaging the 2 pKa's on either side, 6.0 and 9.2, gives us an isoelectric point of 7.6. Histidine is our mystery amino acid. It's chiral, it has a nitrogen in the side chain, and its isoelectric point is 7.6. Thanks so much for playing our game, and for your prize, a deeper understanding of one of the most foundational.
Okay. Bye. Oh, it's just a prorated one.
I think the girls with their nails done now.
For that exact reason, if somebody walks up like a Monty with a shield, you throw down the toxic canister, detonate it, they can't really walk up. Well, there's no smoke in that lineup previously, so that means whoever's playing there, when that Blackbeard starts stomping up, you don't really have a lot of great options to either repel him or keep him at bay. So just one of those things where I don't think that operator lineup was bad by any means, but you can only bring so many tools in Rainbow Six, and I think a really important piece to dealing with that Dirk push was just unfortunately left off the table. Can't always account for everything, but Shopify seemed perfectly willing to resign themselves to that possibility. This line what they're bringing is almost entirely the same, except instead of a castle, Ambi is moving to the Warden, which is likely something we'll see a lot of since Ying is unbanned by Shopify.
Yeah, Warden does just become almost a little bit of a necessity sometimes.
Just in case.
It's a just in case, isn't it? Fultz, a very quick work there, getting himself up into garage and onto those rafters. The EMP sent out, a C4 ripped and ready over the toss. It was I tell you, the EMP sent out, a C4 ripped and ready over the toss. It was I tell you, great throw there from Canadian. It couldn't have gone any better. Only problem was Fultz had backed up. Still been dealt a good portion of damage though. Sitting at maybe 10, 15 health. Certainly a little bit softer than you would like a Blackbeard being. Now becomes quite susceptible to any other splash explosives, of which there are 2 more C4s, by the way, in the lineup. But look at Ashen, a very aggressive position quite early on.
Yeah, SSG always do quite a good job at taking advantage of that pace, realizing they have an opening, and then immediately capitalizing off of it. So even though they clear green, you know, at about the normal point, Ashen immediately moves into con, secures that forward point. Lost about 15 seconds or so on just, you know, little bit, just a little bit of extra due diligence, but they don't, and instead they progress forward. Bolt's running into some issues though, as while he gets that nade kill, he can't jump in immediately. He ends up being downed in the process. That earlier C4 by Canadian really paying off. And while they have the advantage, certainly not in control. For the moment they're stuck outside of the building, struggling to find a way into Gym. Another goes down, and they might just win this on kills. No defuse plant necessary. It's a flawless round for SSG. They take 2 in a row.
Do we see the timeout from SR? Very unusual to not be able to hold either gym and bedroom or upstairs or downstairs inside of Church and Arsenal on a clubhouse. SSG have just been crashing over SR at the moment, and I don't really feel like we've seen too much of a response, Lings. A lot of this has been SSG focused. I don't really feel like we've spoken about SR too much, and that's never a great sign. As predicted, the timeout comes, and it comes early. Not super uncommon to see it a round 2 timeout, but it's definitely a sign that things aren't going too well. SR struggling in just about every aspect right now. Not able to get those trades out. It doesn't even seem like they can find anywhere to, I don't even want to say hide, but they can't find anywhere to sit comfortably.
Yeah, I think, and I think one of the things for me is the main lack of response we're seeing from SR is in that late round, which isn't to say that they have a lot of room to work with, as we just saw. SSG had an attacker playing down below, waiting to see if anybody from the Rebellion decided to go and play for a C4 from beneath. That's just checking all your bases. If you're Space Station Gaming, you know somebody's going to try to play for that C4. You know somebody is going to try and deny the plan, so you go downstairs. As a result, Newer's also holding that angle on Jacuzzi. Really, just a really great checklist and thorough work from Space Station. And yet, the unfortunate onus is still on Shopify Rebellion to try and find a way. Maybe try to hit a flank on the opposite side. Maybe that's what we'll see. Not necessarily a flank, but maybe we'll see some late round adjustments. But honestly, SSG, to their credit, are looking very good in this late round. And even though all of the opening picks so far have come sub a minute, the rounds have ended pretty soon after that. And that is a testament to SSG having a really good foundation and even better execution.
I think it's what we've come to expect from SSG, right? And it's definitely one of those situations where they've had a little bit of time off. They've been able to get themselves back into that SSG zone, and they come out like unbeatable. And then slowly, it's like a cycle. You sort of see that dip off a little bit again. Was a Swarm Peak really the answer?
I honestly, mute Canadian. I'm worried this guy might have just been window banged, because you normally see a 417 like
yeah.
Oh dearie.
Oh dear.
It's gonna be one of those matches, I think.
Are we going to give Spoit the benefit of the doubt and say, did he get window banged as well?
No, I unfortunately. if
or is he trying to salvage a kill that Canadian didn't get?
If he's been window banged, I unfortunately think that maybe we just forfeit the match for Shopify Rebellion right now. They do not have the mandate of heaven.
Just down to sheer bad luck. Not the best start, especially after a timeout. He died inside a Logi. Maybe through the hatch, I guess?
I was gonna say either through the hatch. No, because they just it'd have to be through the hatch based off the angle. Oh! All right, well, I'd love to see that from Ambi. Well, fortunately,
it's kind of a tough game right now, isn't it?
It is.
Like,
I don't really quite know what they're doing wrong.
Rexon's at least been recovered. So we've got the ROU projector, which has been bounced around quite nicely by Newers. That's just going to give him a nice little shield and allow him to play out here and try and exploit that angle on into Cash. A little bit of aggressive play here from Surf. Player that we've seen multiple times have real big moments. He's going to have a massive one right now as the smoke trying to command the position inside of construction, but there are so many angles for him to worry about. The worst part is it's J9O that's trying to be the spear point of that challenge.
Nice.
Ashen with the support. Surf, he'll find his one, but it immediately gets traded. J9O and him direct 1-for-1 trade. Ambi now trying to rotate back up these cash stairs. It's not even like there's not a lot of time. There's still 45 seconds. No cameras to speak of, at least for the attackers. And Ambi is allowed to reposition right now. Surprised he's been given that much space, to be honest with you. He'll find himself one as a double. Surely he doesn't pick up the next two.
You'd have to hope not. I mean, with the time and the advantage SSG had early on, there's no way it could go Ambi's way, and yet he's just found another 1v1 as Ashen moves into the site. Creeping, peeking around the bomb chassis. Oh, the Ibana finishes him off. Through the wall, Ashen stops the bleeding, but then again, it's only a flesh wound, all things considered. SSG are up 3 in a row, and that round seemed done by the first 10 seconds in.
Gotta feel kind of sorry for Ambi there. I really thought there was a chance that he'd be able to pull that off. We've seen him do similar things in the past. But he shouldn't be left in that position. Yes, it's winnable, especially for a player of Ambi's caliber. But realistically, it should never have got to that point. SSG going to breathe a slight sigh of relief there, but the game still remains very one-sided, regardless of how close round 3 was. Oh, that's just bad timing. That keeper barrier's basically got people killed as well.
Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, it's really great positioning by SSG and awareness. They fully understood the implications of, but also the smoke in that position. Just really great work.
I think they're doing a very good job of very quickly reading whatever SR is setting up and coming up with a nice response to it. But again, it's a team that they've played a lot. You know, these two teams have played against each other plenty at this stage. So you're expecting both of them to be comfortable. SSG can be a difficult team to play against. I think SR maybe less so. Maybe a slight bit more predictable, and that's where we saw that unpredictability come out at Munich, and it again didn't do them too well. So not saying that they're in like an identity crisis, but you do sort of wonder what you're going to get with them. Right downstairs, as we were in the first round. Now, we've seen the Blackbeard band. It has been a mainstay so far for SSG. They've played it every single round. Interestingly now, though, they don't still play the Monty. Instead, they've switched up things entirely and are going to go for something slightly different.
I think keeping Shopify on their toes is just an excellent strategy. I'm not going to complain about it. Certainly makes our jobs easier and makes the siege more entertaining. So happy for that reason, too. Ashen's 6-0, by the way, highlighted by the desk, 3rd lowest rated player at Munich, which is a low that is shocking for Ashen, even going 0-3. Somebody we really expect to put up decent numbers. Doing a good job this game, and not only with the kills, but as you can see, in the first 30 seconds, already creeped up through strip, moved into billiards, and has acquired great forward positioning for SSG early on. They were getting to the vertical destruction about 1.5 minutes, 1:15 remaining. And while they still have the sledge and could find themselves dying to a C4, here he is again, pushing down main stairs. This is SSG, hungry for the initiative, hungry for momentum, and always ready for an opportunity.
Benji just seeing if there's anything that he can find right now. Going to be playing that perfect and very important blue roll. Hang around on side of the hatch and then eventually make your play a down blue. Definitely not a kitchen dirt that is being attempted this time. At least that's what the indication is right now, given the positioning of these SSG players. Can start to try and rip open this floor. Still no book play, which is a little bit of an interesting one for me. I don't know if it's the nades back on the sledge that is sort of making that difference a little bit. Hatch, that can start to be chipped away at, although 3 impacts left. With no book and only the sledge to rely on, it's a bit riskier, as we've already seen, opening up that floor in kitchen. Nobody there for the trick. Hatch now opened, 45 seconds left. SR should be able to hold these power positions. If you look at the kit that they've still got left, they've got 2 C4s. Yes, they haven't got any sort of smoke denial, but they've also got those Vulcan canisters. I'm not too sure how well SSG have done at dealing with those. Ambi going to kick things off with a kill onto Action.
Yeah, this is where the lack of that Monty or a shield in general really hurts. It's how SSG forced their way into the site, now lacking it and down Ashen. Somebody's got to go big from the space station. Will it be Benja? No, dies in blue. And normally, if that position doesn't go big, the whole round falls apart. Newers with 1, but it really doesn't matter whatsoever. Shopify run the same strategy back, basically, and it pays off. Without that shield, SSG have no way in.
Yeah, bold strategy going for the no shield play. You just got to look at the lineup and understand that you really haven't got as much as you previously did. In that position, it would be nice to have a Capitao. Capitao is, of course, banned. It makes it just a slight bit harder. And again, you kind of need the players that are making the vert to see a little bit more success, but pockets of safety were found. And as predicted, those power positions, they really came into play. That's, let's be honest, that's kind of how round 1 should have gone.
Agreed.
You can't just drop into that site and expect things to happen. It's a very difficult site to attack. So good on SR for managing to steady themselves there and pick up that round, because let's be honest, basement should be kind of a given here on Clubhouse. They've started late. It doesn't mean that they are out of the fight yet. Still got 2 rounds on this defensive side to bring things up level. And of course, still got the whole other half of the game to go.
Gym bedroom is similar to basement, or at least the first iteration of basement, with an opening kill coming quite late in the round. It's been the trend so far. SSG were able to remove the defenders from Cash and CCTV at about the normal point. With Ashen then moving into construction, then all holding angles either outside a jacuzzi or outside on metal balcony, and picking off the Rebellion defenders when they walked into SSG's crosshairs. It's not Ashen this time, but Benjamaster, who's moved below, taken an early positioning and secured that important vertical control that we highlighted before, denies anybody from the Rebellion. Of course, rotating below for a C4, but right now, could catch anybody who thinks it's safe to rotate back from CCTV either down red or to rotate down metal and go for a flank later on in the round. It's basically SSG running things back and hitting all the high notes that we saw hit in the early game from round 2.
Canadian's still going to be rocking that mute. Still heavy on the C4s as well. 3 C4s being brought in this lineup yet again here from SR. And they're making good use of them. Ambi is going to find one over onto Fulls. A bit of an attempt there, but just not enough of an angle for Newers to really take advantage of. It's going to be Benja and Ashen doing the hard work, though. Finally, we see a book in the lineup here, and Benja, very known for playing on that operator, often finds himself on little solo missions, and he's been successful in this one.
It's a very tactically sound play from Benja. It's not picking off a flank or denying a C4. It's just that when the defenders start rotating back into sight from CCTV and Cash, other defenders are going to rotate, move, and give up position, so that way everybody can settle into their late round spots. So as they're moving that rotation, because Benja's not been spotted, he can look up through the hatch or make any holes actively, and then take down the Rebellion defenders as they start setting up. Ashen also gets a pick as they rotate back in, and while breaking through this is going to be a bit difficult, once that fire clears, SSG have the advantage, and because of these Bs, have the utility and information as a result. Flashbangs go in, but Surf does not lose his vision, retains it, picks up Ashen, could easily find themselves in line for another, but J90 quicker to the punch. The Type 89 working very well, moving in with the bearings, spotted on the default, ready for the angle, yet Canadians quicker. The advantage is shifting hands, but SSG still hold on with Canadian low, dodging the flash. Space Station are ready for it. 4-1 right now on their attacks. Less one-sided, but still SSG's game.
Another round where the opening pick goes the way of SR as well. It has not been an indicator in this fixture so far as to which way that round is going to go. Opening pick in round 1, SR, SSG walk away with it. Same story there in round 5. SSG, again, showing that they are a good team at fighting from behind here. Back on the Monty. Now, it didn't do them too well. They did a little bit. They were able to gain a little bit of early control and sort of bully the way in. But as we saw, Fultz, he didn't last too long. It wasn't necessarily the Monty that was the big success in that round. It was, again, the rallying of SSG. And in some ways, SR maybe just overcommitting a little bit to holding that cash side. But then what else do? You've got to hold it. You maybe just need a slightly better strategy to do so. Clash being banned out there, maybe coming into a slight bit of effect. But even still, I'd like to see like the old, why am I playing a shield at the top of cash, and you know, someone that's, or even the warden in that position, just someone that's going to be really difficult to budge and, you know, play everything around him. But I don't know, it's not been going SR's way today.
No, it's not, and we didn't really mention it, but the Clash ban from SSG is a very good ban, just because, well, obviously one. Clash, but also SR, specifically Canadian, can use him, and it's something we see a lot of teams do where they won't play it up like Clash the first 3 rounds, hope it doesn't get banned, then they bring it out and showcase all their strats with it, but SSG, not trying to, just calling their bluff, not really wanting to deal with it. It might have been the kind of tool that makes a position like Red Stairs stronger, as Ollie was talking about, without it available. SR forced to bring things, in this case, like the Wamai, like the Fenrir as well. Perfectly good operators, especially the Fenrir, can be quite strong. But lacking a very obvious and useful tool like that Clash can prove problematic. Final defense will be on CCTV and Cash. And while it's an opening pick for the Rebellion, it's, well, 1, quickly traded, but 2, even if it wasn't, it's not the bellwether for success that it is for most teams.
Fenrir is going to slow things down just a little bit. J9O not able to gain the control that he wants on that top floor as he tries to transition across that main stair. Benja back playing that flank watch. He's got a chance here. They could line up for him. Finds one onto Ambi. Just waiting for someone to double dip and surf Will. Oh! No way he gets 2 there. You could see it just lining up there with the outlines. That's going to be a nail in the coffin here for round number 6. Unless Rexon and Canadian can pull something incredible out of the bag.
This, unfortunately, just doesn't feel like a Rebellion that can do that. We saw Ambi come close when, 1v1s were being isolated and given to him. But right now, SSG have the positioning, they've got the manpower, and they have the time. 5-1 right now. Space Station running away with their attacks. And arguably, I think in an alternative reality, Ollie, SR only get 2-4.
Yeah. I don't think that they've played better Siege than 2-4. There's the Ambi round, and that's it. An Ambi individual round. It's a decent defense downstairs inside a church in Arsenal. And then aside from that, this is very representative of the Siege that we've seen today so far. Something that surprised me is how stuck in the ways Shopify have been with the lineup that they've been playing. It's been Goyo, Mew, Azami, Mirror. It's really not changed all too much. Now, obviously, they're playing that for a reason, but it isn't the time that these rounds are coming down to. A lot of the time, it's just kills. It's just SSG are winning gunfights. There's really no 2 ways about it.
I mean, this is crazy right here.
You could just see it coming a mile away, couldn't you? When you've got those 3 outlines, you're just like, there's almost going to be, if it was a Cali, you'd be like, there's going to be a collat in a minute. 2 players are going to cross and it's going to be boom.
It is reaching that point for Space Station, at least on map 1, where it feels like either they can do no wrong, or if they can, it doesn't really matter all that much. And the aggregate things seem to come their way. Fan phase goes through. Basically a rerun for SSG if you say ranged breacher and not the exact operator, but it's Hibana Capital this time rather than Ace and Cap. Then Bandit is still in the cards for Space Station if they want to. Shopify, Rebellion only banning the Cade and the Mira. But you can see SSG are quite happy that the Rebellion did not ban the Clash like they did, bringing it for their first defense on CCTV. And right now, Clash and Azami potentially both on rafters. The Rebellion have their work cut out for them.
Yeah, it's not really a combination that you want to be seeing, is it?
Especially with the Cap ban.
I was going to say, not when good old Capital's banned. I mean, yeah, you can deal with it, or maybe you just go somewhere else. Maybe that's just the easier option.
That's how you deal with it. You just don't. The only way to win is by not playing.
You deal with it by not dealing with it. Just ignore all our problems there. And just hope that they go away. Jokes aside, SR doing a pretty good job of getting everything open so far. They've managed to open up that breach, and they are going to be able to just navigate around that mute jammer somewhat as well. Ashen, he's going to be playing close with the shotgun for the time being. Now time, a little bit of drone work into the site. The problem with avoiding or just ignoring Garage is, of course, that that's a big point of vulnerability. We don't just take Garage for the fun of it as attackers. You take it because you don't want to be shot from there. And if you're going to try and move in and get a plant down into the site, well, you need a little bit of something going on inside a Garage. And it looks like that's what SR are framing up for now.
They're going with the method that's come into favor, which is using these air jabs and firing them up. But Newers, we saw him prone right underneath CC window at the beginning of the round, and I don't think he got droned. Just pops up, takes down Rexon. That's meant to give the information for Spoit to place his air jabs. The Canadian going down too. You've still got the method by which you were going to deal with J90. You have a whole lot less guns meant to shoot him once he falls due to those air jabs. He'll send the next one up as he's got direct information. Flash and air jab both go out. I was about to say should get J90 pretty easily. Yes, it will. Spoit coming alive in the late game as Newers late on the draw. Spotted by the Nomad as he hops up. Not entirely his fault, but the breach open and players flooding into garage. There was very little places he could go. Spoit has just brought the round back in a big way for the Rebellion. That wall is reinforced, so they cannot jump directly through it. Spoit's now also rappelling outside, joining his team on the plat wall. The diffuser outside will come from this way. Ambi down below to make sure nobody goes for that C4. Benja is his main target. Yeah, we see plenty of teams stay up there, still throw that C4 up top. A very late rotation as Serve drops off plat. Spoit holds the cover. This plant's going to go down with less than 10 seconds remaining. Can Benja get that C4 into position? Ashen playing close. Oh, it's perfect!
Oh, Lord.
Don't even need a buzzer beater. That was right on time and right on mark. Over the top. Map point for Space Station Gaming.
I don't think I've ever seen so much hesitation as to, do we go this way? Do we go that way? Are we going to push through the breach? Are we going to actually take advantage of garage that we took? So confused there from SR. They really spent a lot of time figuring that one out. Spoit did a good job by taking control of garage. But the problem was they just had nothing off the back of it. No hard breach left. That was the big problem. 56 seconds, 55 seconds, garage control was gained. And we got down to 5 seconds on the clock. 50 seconds, and it was, are we going this way? Are we going that way? There was no way to get through garage at that point. And the denial, it was there. SSG, 3 Toxic Babe canisters, a C4 from Benja, which was just sent from the heavens to pick up 2. And Ashen playing in a really off angle. 1 person on cash window, Ashen's dead. Ashen can't play there. If they've got a hint that somebody's going to be playing in that position, can't do it.
5 seconds remaining.
I mean, obviously because of the 11 and 2, but the positioning from Ashen has really been excellent so far this entire series. It always feels like he's making space for the team, finding himself in these little off angles, hitting the shots as well, but a comeback performance from his massive I was going to say crash out, but honestly, we could have used a bit more crashing out from Ashen. He might have got more than third to last. But he's an excellent player. Very, very good. And we're seeing some of the heights of his play style in this game right now. I mean, Ollie, I kind of just feel like this one's over. I don't know much else to say.
I feel like it's map 2, isn't it?
Yeah, I feel like Nighthaven's already in the cards.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's definitely going to be on the cards. It's just whether we, it's just how quickly we get there, but I've got a feeling we're going to be there in around 2 minutes. It does depend, though, you know, and stranger things would have happened. It would be rude of us to count SR out at this point, but they haven't shown us anything that I can really get behind at the minute. And it's not, you know, it's nothing strategy. It's a lot of it's gunfights. Rexon's 1 and 7. And that's a player that, on his day, he can hang with the best of them. There's nobody positive. Ambi's 6 and 6. And what, 3 of them are exit frags on the round that he didn't end up clutching out? By the way, no diss to Ambi. It was a difficult clutch to make, but that just puts into context the lack of kills that we've seen so far for the Shopify side.
As you move to the late round, Ashen holding a very normal spot. You've been watching this SSG roster for a long time. It's a normal spot generally, but he often finds himself on the Sazami playing inside of construction. Great with the impact trick. Doing everything for this team at the moment. Well, I mean, everyone from SSG is showing up, but Ashen doing quite a lot. Unfortunately, misses the second one. But with 2 minutes wasted, he's got that Kiba to fall back behind.
Activated.
I would. The worry or the anxiety in me, Ollie, is saying that's a bad spot to sit. But how many times have I seen Ashen play that on Bank, for example, and somehow find a way through? Well, maybe I should listen to that, because unfortunately, Ambi playing at the window will take him down, and Rebellion get a much-needed opening.
As we've said, the opening pick hasn't always been an indicator as to which way the round is going to go, but this one has gone a lot slower so far. 35 seconds on the clock. C4 gets sent out there from Benja, doesn't do enough damage to Canadian, and he's threatening to hop in now. Benja is going to find one onto Rexon, and Canadian desperately looking for a pocket of safety, but I'm not sure he'll find it.
Oh no, neither him nor the Rebellion, yet we find ourselves in the 2v2. Jane, I know, creeping around as he gets the call. Somebody inside a bathroom, it's inside the house, and Jane, I know's kicked him out. One down with the C4, another.
What a
We'll
shot
put
fucking shit, boys.
Seems like dominance is an understatement.
In my opinion, Nighthaven is something else to take note of is that Labs is usually over quite quickly for SSG. It is not a map that they stick around on. They've stuck around against FaZe, but we all know about FaZe in this map. They've got a bit of a ghost in the closet with this map, as it were, and it does seem to drag on for FaZe as well when they play it. But SSG never seem to stick around on Labs too long. Regardless of the result, it's usually over quite quickly. Now, if that's going to have any bearing on the game that we'll see today, we'll have to wait and find out. But I just thought it was interesting as we move into the start of Labs.
Well, it is funny as well because in my brain as I was going into the series, I'm like, I've seen SSG play Labs quite a bit, and I'm running back, and I didn't even consciously recognize it until you pointed it out. But yeah, looking back through it, I'm like, I remember that loss. Well, that was against Wildcard. I remember that loss. Oh, well, that was also against Wildcard,
as well.
wasn't it?
That's weird.
But dude, I think it is a valid point. I mean, there might just be a bit of a hang-up with Wildcard on this map in particular, and I mean, even including the losses to Wildcard, 8-4 is still not a bad record by any stretch. So, or was it 5-4?
5-4, yeah.
That's still a winning record.
It's still good, you know. It's competitive siege. Like you should be going up against the best teams in the world. Like to go even +1, I'll take it.
No, I'd absolutely take it, especially since this is ostensibly your well, it's not ostensibly, it is Shopify Rebellion's pick, but ostensibly this is the map that's supposed to favor them, and if on that map you're a winning record by 1 and 3 of those losses are against one team, I'd say we're doing mighty fine. A lot of yapping from us, by the way, because aside from a roam game that's not fired a shot, nothing's really happened. And, well, all right, good timing for me. Ashen gets the first pick onto Surf, recognizing that we might start losing viewers if the pace doesn't pick up. Ashen will knock down the first, and boy, it's the Thermite. Vigil for Therm trade, and you don't even get the Vigil, and you lose the Buck as well. Ashen is outside the building. If he gets this kill, we should forfeit for the Rebellion, or forfeit for SSG right now. He doesn't. And yet, both Foltz is still on the roam. Ambi does check that corner. Things all square out at a 3v3.
With 45 seconds left. Like, how have we found ourselves here? It's a basement attack, by the way. Or a basement defense, depending on which side of the table you're sitting on. I just find it a little bit strange. It was a big extension from SSG. Now, you could argue that Fultz has done his job there, because you look at the time left now, at this point, 2 Toxic Babe canisters. Okay, there's no C4 in Benja's hands, but there's 20 seconds. There's only so much that you can do, right?
Ooh. There's only so much, but with Canadian getting in your face, he's found one. The next falls soon after. Newer's in a position where he's got to fall back. They've got him spotted and figured out. Ashen doesn't fall on that engagement, and Rebellion recover quite nicely.
Could have done something to try and upset the apple cart there instead of just hiding in the corner inside a kitchen for the whole round. Yeah, he wasted a little bit of time, got a drone, but they still lost the round. In other news, Canadian has doubled his amount of kills that he got in map 1 in round 1 of map 2, which, I mean, I think that deserves a round of applause.
I'm clapping. It was also a good call by Canadian. I think just betting on SSG being a little frenzied in the comms, having lost the 3v3, and making a very SSG-like call. If you know, we're only talking about 2 games in the series, of recognizing the opportunity and picking up the pace. It's very smart, very astute, and it worked out very well. But it's only 1 round, and it's only their second in 2 maps. Maybe SSG will use that as a learning moment. Maybe take a little bit of a step back. Nighthaven Labs is it's similar to Clubhouse, but it is a big map. If you extend too far, too long, a team like the Rebellion, assuming they're playing well, will be able to exploit it. Here, I will say a little bit less the case. You're a first floor defense. You're likely going to have 2 defenders up top playing around the controller. aqua area. You've also got the Clash to bolster the site itself or the roam with that shield. So we still will see some vertical presence, not likelihood from SSG, just hopefully not one that is an overcommitment.
LSR seem to have managed to get their act together a little bit, at least in the break between maps. There was a bit of a concern that this was just going to sort of continue being an SSG day.
Ooh.
That's a little bit unfortunate.
That's unlucky.
Yeah. Throwing the drone onto the boogie drone. Those drones don't interact too well. They're not friends.
No,
The
they
boogie
don't. They don't speak at Thanksgiving.
No, it's got pointy shoulders, you know.
Yeah, I hate pointy shoulders.
Me too. Can't find shirts.
No,
Very difficult. A little bit of knocking on the door of the site already here as Ambi. Got some really good and valuable control. This mid floor, you gotta be really careful. A quick plant is always a fear, and always something that's ringing in the back of your mind. Now there is a Valkyrie. Often teams will play a pulse to give themselves that little bit of information. Somebody hanging out inside of the basement. In this instance, I imagine there's a Valkyrie camera somewhere that's going to be a little bit of an early warning system. There's plenty of C4s. We do have players just dotted around. Well, at the moment, I can't see anyone downstairs. Maybe there is, and just sort of out of view right now. But SR really seem like they're setting themselves up for this. And it kind of telegraphs what they're doing. Because if SSG can't see them, they know that they're going for something a little bit sneaky.
And you can see it transpire. Ashen shut down on a long angle held by Rexon. The Rebellion realize that somebody might be playing down below. They can't get all the bases covered, so they don't hop in with the soft floors. They rotate, and all the kills go their way. You said that Rexon, when he pops off, he can really take over a game. We didn't see it on Club, but we see it in round 2 on Nighthaven. Benjamaster creeping up, blows the C4. The moment for that to have its impact is gone. You might find 1, maybe 2, but unfortunately the collateral does not line up, and they all know Benja's position now. He's got great information, but far too many angles to cover. Good for 2, but not anymore. Shopify Rebellion pick up their second round and are recovering quite nice. A little late in the round. It's just really good calling from Canadian, or just good decision making from the Rebellion as a whole. Now as we move down to basement, repeat site. I'm not saying SSG are going to run that roam back, but nothing about this lineup on face value indicates they're shying away from it whatsoever.
Never one to shy away from a fight, really, SSG, are they? Usually a team that's happy to really put themselves out there somewhat. Speaking of out there, Ashen currently outside of the building, just reinforcing the hatch. It's one that you can only get during the action phase, but you can get it very safely. So it's if you want to do it, feel free. Worth doing. Ashen going to be rocking the Solace. We do often see a little bit of Solace play on Labs, and I feel like we saw a heck of a lot of Solace at Munich as well. Just on the whole, it's definitely had an uptick in the pick rate. Due to some of the recent changes with the gadget and the way that things work, it can be a little bit more valuable now than maybe it once was. Ashen just still keeping to that Solace stereotype, though, of keeping his face pressed up against a window, ready to jump out at a moment's notice. I don't think he's going to find himself any success early on here. The drones are hot on his heels, and with IT breach already open, now time to start thinking about vacating that top floor, as we can already see SSG players dropping back down.
Ashen not staying on the... But even when it seemed SSG were falling back in good time, Rebellion were still able to cut them off. The drone network for the Rebellion, unfortunately, letting that slip a little bit. Ooh, great comm. Benja throws out the C4, and while Ashen falls, you lose the Blitz, the very operator that the Rebellion used to bring them back into the fight in round 1. On top of that, SSG get a brief advantage. You got Spoit fighting back well. It's the trades that are doing the work, or at least the highlight of round 3. As neither side to moving into the late round, a 2v2. But yet still flashbangs in the hands of the attack, smoke canisters in the hands of the defense. I think this is genuinely an even game. Well, it's not anymore.
Yeah, from a util point of view, you look at that and go, oh, maybe the attackers have the edge. Although 3 Toxic Babes, that's a lot to deal with. Now you look at it and you think, oh, GG's, 2 Toxic Babe canisters, default camera up, Surf Is he going to have one of his magic moments? About 45 seconds, so he's got a bit of time to drone, but SSG already know where he is.
The name of the game here is just playing passive, especially like you said, Jan, with those toxic canisters. He lets one go as the Vulcan pack, I think, begins to dissipate. Surf trying to create a rotate hole, it appears, which I really admire, recognizing that his options are limited, and so he will chip away at that wall. Fortunately, he will not see its completion, nor will he see a round victory for any of his efforts. It's only the first round for Space Station Gaming, though, as that roam is still present in round 3. But by taking down that blitz early, and I think just getting ahead of some of that Rebellion information, Ollie, things go quite differently.
Yeah, I think that SSG just needed that little bit of a shake-up, didn't they? Nice to see them get around off the back of the tactical timeout. We fully round out the hard breaches being banned and are now left with only Maverick and tin openers. Try and get that job done. Especially with the pace that Shopify have been moving with, could make things a tiny bit more difficult for them. That vertical was
really unfortunate.
Pretty unforgiving, to be honest with you. Like, you shouldn't really be falling for that at that point in the round. I feel like if that was 2 versus 2 right up until the end, because there was a good portion of time left, what was there, about a minute?
Something like that. Yeah. If it was less than a minute, it was barely so.
Felt like plenty of time for that 2 versus 2. Maybe next time.
Maybe next time.
Maybe next time we get to see it, eh?
Rebellion at least have a good understanding of labs. I mean, trading it down that effectively, being the big difference maker, that there was no recovery really needed. Well, no recovery needed until Surf was put in the 1v2, but Rebellion clearly have a decent understanding of labs, which we knew going in. That's not a surprise, but it's just that understanding has not fallen by the wayside in favor of their really lackluster performance, as we saw in the Clubhouse. So as SSG win the first round on the retry, well, they'll retry the second site once again. See what kind of a roam we see here, if we see a roam, I should say, as it's not guaranteed. But SSG don't appear that they want to give up this control all that much. I should mention, by the way, the outband phase has concluded. We will see all but one hard breacher taken off the board. Surf with the Maverick loses the Thermite he's played for the past few rounds, and Benjo loses a C4, which seemed destined to land at Surf's feet.
Benjo's had some pretty good C4 sauces today, so it really wouldn't surprise me. You mentioned there about Maverick being the resort now for the hard breachers. Does leave you a little bit more vulnerable to those C4 tosses. Although Benji's being the only in this round, means that it isn't something that Shopify are going to have to continue to worry about for the time being. No tin openers left, though, so only the ammo, or the charge, should we say, that's left in the blowtorch. An operator that I absolutely love to see, but I feel like we don't get to see enough of, is the Brava. Rex in there just able to hack a couple of the default cameras and set himself something up. The information really on point right now for SR. We've got a very good handle of where these players are, and you can see this little pinch starting to develop here. Surf walking in through rafters, Canadian making his way across that corridor and those rafters, and Ambi with the opener.
Making good use of that Z-ping information. Looks to find the next fight behind the pillar. It's Newers instead to get the first for SSG, yet it's no advantage resulting for Space Station Gaming. It's another really close affair, just like round 3. Shopify Rebellion get vertical control off the back of those trades, but again, they lose the shield. Canadian going down on the blitz early last time, and now going down on the Monty here as well. What you're left with is utility that is not very well suited for this late game. You get those vertical angles, great, but you don't really have the manpower to make good use of them. If you send 2 down below and only 1 up top, could easily get flanked by an SSG defender. You've got some flashbangs and smokes, sure, but only 2 from Ambi, and those smokes can only cover so much for Shopify Rebellion. JNNO still has 1 toxic canister remaining, 10 seconds of denial. An impact grenade from Newers as well, not much, but in a pinch can deal some really good damage to deny a plant. And the worst of all, is that sixth man. The time starting to breathe down Shopify Rebellion's neck as the control is lackluster, the kill's non-existent, Ambi's first comes much too late, and SSG tie the game.
SSG doing such a good job of getting themselves back into this game. Their timeout proving more than effective now. After 2 consecutive rounds tie things up, and you start to get flashbacks almost of SR's performance on Clubhouse and wonder, was the start of Labs just a bit of a flash in the pan? It was a very successful opening to round number 4. I don't think he really could have asked for much more for SR. They put themselves in a very, very winnable position. And the Canadian strays too far, dies to the nitro, and everything starts to unpick. And then part of you just sits there and wonders, did SSG just let him in a little bit? You know, or did they just deal with the attack that was coming to them? Okay, they lose Benja straight away. Ambi's there for that. I say straight away. It was kind of a late opening pick in and around the minute 20 mark. But then they're able to react off the back of that.
10 seconds insertion.
Even game now. And pressure back onto Shopify. That lead that they'd got themselves at the start has been dwindled very, very quickly.
The game is not gone. G have won. The trades have been prodigious. It's been a very close affair when it comes to the man count advantage. So all hope is not lost, especially since it's a tie game. We're reaching a new site now. We've not seen second floor played at all throughout this map so far, as SSG opted to repeat the first 2 sites they lost, and it's worked well. But now for both them and the Rebellion. Who that will favor is yet to be determined. But something we want to see is Canadian alive to use that shield. He's not really had an impact with it in the 2 rounds, well, the past 2 rounds that we've seen. And we know how good it can be based off that round 1 victory on basement. So getting Canadian active onto the Monty, keeping him alive for a long time and getting value out of him might be the key that Shopify need for these otherwise very close affairs.
Because let's be honest, the rounds are coming down fairly close. It's one of the reasons why hard breach bans can be so powerful here. Look at the difficulty in opening up just a simple IT wall at the halfway point in the round, and only now are both of these walls going to be open. I mean, at least one soft, ready to be open, but look at Fultz. Not one to shy away from a fight, but will be punished. Surf on the tight angle there, just making sure that Ambi's nice and safe on that book as he opens up that wall.
Another kill. Reaching the point where it's hard to see this round going SSG's way. Canadian taking Raptors with the Monty just like we hope to see. Denying Jay and I know the ability to use that pocket reinforcement. Newers will swing out from below, throw up that C4 underneath IT. Doesn't blow it, might have information or might just get lucky. That C4 and that headshot. All of a sudden, SSG are back in the fight. Only 1 attacker remaining is that Monty. Only 1 remaining has a gun. Canadian's gonna move in. Look to put that diffuser down as Surf watching these feet holes should be able to make mincemeat of Newers the moment that bandit walks across Aqua Stairs. Where's Benja? C4 in hand, ready to throw, ready for the information. Yet SSG continue to wait. Newers baiting Surf's attention. Maybe letting Benja get in position, but as you move halfway down, nobody can get in position. Canadian, no, he's not safe! Newers from below, no C4 necessary. Benja through the vertical hole, shuts him down, and in the 1v1, only 2 seconds remaining. Can Benja get the angle, or can Surf get off in time? He falls off, the SMG 12! It's far too jumpy, and the time is far too low. In the 1v1, the Rebellion retake their lead.
That could be a big momentum swing right now that the Rebellion so desperately need. Don't forget, it's early days inside of the regional finals. Game 1. There is a lower bracket. Just because it's there doesn't mean that you want to fall into it straight away. finally starting to see a little bit of life in this fixture with rounds coming down close, big plays on either side. Nua's massive quad. And Surf with that clutch up. What did Surf? Surf had something like 6 clutches inside of regular stage NAL. Was it not something ridiculous?
I mean, he's always been a really good late round and just backline player for the Rebellion. This is the kind of thing that, you know, even if he didn't have 6 clutches this is in the regular stage, this is not the kind of thing I think any of us would be surprised at seeing.
No, he's that kind of player, right?
5 seconds left before insertion.
I'm trying to pull it up now because I'm curious, and I remember it being a unless I've misremembered, but I'm pretty sure it was something crazy.
Either way, got
Yeah,
a
it
feel for
was 8.
SSG there. even better than the already ridiculous number you had said. Got a
It's
feel
like
for
1.5
SSG there.
a week or something.
Something like that. But now that was 3-2 in a map that is seeming like it's going to be extremely close. You need every round you can get, and that was already one that Newers had basically stolen from Shopify Rebellion. Surf was just making that round what it very likely should have been from the get-go, at least from that 5v2 that Shopify Rebellion acquired. Sure, it's a testament to Shopify Rebellion letting things slip, but SSG need everything they can get their hands on Nighthaven Labs. Losing that will hurt. Basement for the 3rd time now in this half. SSG did a good job on the roam last time, but again, it's been close affairs in all of SSG's victories, coming down to 2v2s both times. If the trend continues here, that's basically coin flip odds, especially with enough time remaining.
Yeah, it feels like a lot's coming down to this last round as the sides sit right now. Big chance for SSG to level it up and kind of salvage the half. On the flip side, if Shopify could get themselves a little bit of lead, they might get that very dangerous thing called belief. Sometimes all it takes is teams to get a little bit of belief in them, and we can see them go on and build from that confidence. Certainly some of the players are starting to exude it now a little bit more here. Ambi 5-2. He had a decent game on Clubhouse. He was able to pick up plenty of kills. They weren't always the most impactful. At least this time, opening pick again going in favor of SR, but immediately traded and then some.
The 20 amino acids are often called the building blocks for one of life's most important machines, proteins. You probably already know that proteins come in all shapes and sizes. In this video, we will classify a protein's primary structure, secondary structure, tertiary structure, and quaternary structure. This means we'll start with the smallest subunit, peptides, and understand how, with each level of complexity, we're able to create a new structure that will eventually play a critical role in our biology. The most basic structure of proteins is our primary structure. I know, clever, right? This is just a linear chain of amino acids that have been linked together through peptide bonds. In case you forgot, peptide bonds are a special flavor of an amide bond that forms between the carboxyl group of one amino acid and the amino group of another amino acid. These individual amino acids that are linked together by these peptide bonds are often referred to as residues. And this chain of peptide bonds means that we're left with an exposed amino group at this end of the chain, which is therefore called the N-terminus. And if we zoom in on the other end of the chain, we find an exposed carboxyl group. So this is called the C-terminus. One important feature of our primary structure is that these individual residues will dictate how our proteins will fold at all of the higher structural levels, which we'll take a look at next. When going one level up, our secondary structure of proteins really only consists of 2 things, alpha helices and beta pleated sheets. These are structures formed by H bonds between nearby amino acid residues. And when you think about alpha helices, think of these long coiling structures that snake up clockwise around a central axis. A carbonyl oxygen atom and an amide hydrogen atom further down the chain form intramolecular hydrogen bonds at the core of the helix, allowing for side chains of the amino acids to point outwards. A common protein where you'll see alpha helices is alpha keratin, which actually makes up our fingernails. In fact, the protein name alpha keratin refers to these alpha helices. These alpha helices act like springs, and when you press into your fingernails, these springs press into each other. What's happening is the kinks in between your helices get interwoven among each other, and then their hydrogen bonding gets amplified. That's why when you tap your fingernail, it's so hard. Beta-pleated sheets, on the other hand, have a bit more character to them. That means that they can be either parallel or anti-parallel, where our linear peptide chains basically lie on top of and alongside one another. These create rows that are again held together by those intramolecular hydrogen bonds between carbonyl oxygen atoms on one chain and amide hydrogen atoms in the adjacent chain. The pleats come from the structure's greediness for forming as many hydrogen bonds as possible. It'll contort our sheets ever so slightly to get those oxygen and hydrogen atoms close enough to interact and stabilize the structure. Now, in this case, the side chains of our residues will point both above and below the plane of our pleated sheets. And if you're wondering where we'd see a beta sheet in real life, look no further than fibroin, a protein that's used in silk fibers. The flat beta sheets actually reflect light at many different angles, which is what gives silk its sheen. As you can see, hydrogen bonding is so important in a protein's secondary structure. It's literally the magnets that warp our beautiful linear chain into these organized helices and sheets. But often, hydrogen bonding doesn't work alone. The amino acid proline plays an important role in beta-pleated sheet formation in particular. Because of the tight hydrocarbon loop on its side chain, proline is the perfect size for creating turns between chains of beta-pleated sheets. But be careful when looking for proline in the center of one of these structures. Its tight loop makes it unideal to be found in the middle of either alpha helices or beta-pleated sheets, because there, proline will introduce a kink. So if you are looking for proline, look at the end of rows of beta-pleated sheets. It should not be found in the middle of these structures. Hopefully by now, you can see that knowing the amino acids, their characteristics, their one-letter and three-letter codes, and their structures will help you learn how to identify and apply these in different settings and how they will change the shape or interaction in a protein based on their hydrophilic and hydrophobic environments. With tertiary structures, now we start entering a more 3D element of our proteins. Recall that in primary structures, our residues were held together using peptide bonds, and in secondary structures, hydrogen bonding kept our alpha helices and beta-pleated sheets intact. Well, in tertiary structures, we have to break that simple pattern. Instead of just one type of interaction causing our shape, there are several types of interactions that glue everything together. These include hydrophilic and hydrophobic interactions between the side chains of our residues, and also include literal covalent linkages, which we'll talk about soon. Now, remember, most living organisms are really just giant sacs of water that have different proteins and organelles and molecules floating around inside. So that should help you visualize why proteins hide most of their hydrophobic residues toward their centers. This is where we dive into an important part of protein structure, and that is protein folding. As those hydrophobic residues tuck themselves away toward the center of a protein structure, our hydrophilic linkers from the amino and carboxyl groups get dragged inward too, stabilizing themselves through electrostatic interactions and hydrogen bonding. When this happens, our hydrophilic side chains, and if you forgot, these are typically charged or polar, they have nowhere else to go but to stick out on the surface of the protein. But before we get too far, we can't talk about tertiary structures without telling you about the most common and important component in these now 3D shapes, and that is disulfide bonds. When you hear disulfide, hopefully our amino acid cysteine pops right into the front of your mind. This is the only amino acid with a free sulfide SH group that can form bonds with another cysteine to create these disulfide bridges. Now, fun facts that you already know about disulfide bonds are that they are formed through an oxidation reaction where we lose 2 protons and 2 electrons, and that they're important in creating loops in our protein chains and even determine how wavy or curly human hair is. One final tip that I want to leave you with is that if you ever hear the term denaturation, that typically refers to the loss of any aspect of 3D tertiary structure, from a small warp in the structure all the way to reducing a protein back down to the primary structure chain in the extreme. When we talk about ordinary structures, I want you to think of this as a high-end feature that's not available unless you're a luxury model of a protein. See, all proteins have primary, secondary, and tertiary structures, but not all of them have quaternary structure characteristics. This is because quaternary structure involves subunits of smaller globular peptides that all come together and dictate the overall function and stability of these luxury class proteins. The individual subunits become more stable by reducing the surface area of the overall protein complex. They provide a benefit of reducing the amount of DNA needed to encode the entire protein complex. And because they each have independent characteristics, they have a bit more flexibility to bring catalytic sites together to kick a biological process along or create what we call allosteric effects. The basic idea is that when one subunit goes through some kind of structural change, it will change the activity of the other subunits. To help you ground this in reality, a classic example that you've heard of is hemoglobin. It's made of 4 distinct subunits that work together to help us carry oxygen to different parts of our body. By way of summary, let's build our protein. Primary structure is just the linear chain of amino acid residues. Secondary structure is our alpha helices and beta-pleated sheets. Tertiary structure then is the more 3D conformations that come after putting together those alpha helices and beta-pleated sheets. And quaternary structure involves multiple subunits of proteins working together. What I recommend is putting them all into a table so that you can see and remember what kind of shape each structure has, what dictates the conformational changes, remember hydrogen bonding, hydrophilic and hydrophobic environment, or disulfide linkages, and the key characteristics and examples within each structure type.
proper wrong.
Phew, it's getting a little hot in here. If you're like me, trying to memorize all the different enzymes and how they function really makes your brain start to steam up. Luckily though, we can channel that heat into a little hot mnemonic that will help keep track of all of them. Let's cover the foundational terms. An enzyme is a protein that functions as a catalyst, specifically in biological processes. Without enzymes, our bodies would have a hard time completing some of the fancier molecular reactions in a useful time frame. Biologically speaking, it would be pretty impossible to spontaneously get 3 negatively charged phosphates to randomly add themselves to an adenosine to make ATP without an enzyme or 2 or really 8 to help us get there. Some of these reactions are even life and death, so we just don't have the luxury to wait around for molecules to get close, tango, and form a new product. Our bodies are at the temperature of, well, maybe a high school prom. Everyone's moving, just not high energy, and certainly no really exciting reactions are happening on the dance floor. Heck, half the class is too shy to even get out there. So we have 2 options. Find a way to lower the energy necessary to get out there, or start physically pushing people together. Enter the slow dance. Not much energy, everyone can participate, just remember not to step on anybody's toes, but this is our catalyst. Catalysts speed up processes by lowering the activation energy of the reaction. We still reach the same equilibrium point as we would without them, but from our perspective, it's easier and therefore quicker to get there. A characteristic of catalysts is that they remain unchanged or are regenerated after a reaction. So an enzyme catalyst should appear in both the initial and final stages of the reaction in the exact same state. Certainly, nobody's changing the slow dance's beat in this reaction. But if the slow dance didn't cut it and people were still too shy, your wingmate comes to the rescue, pulling together a couple of consenting students. You know they were going to dance eventually. Your wingmate just gets the ball rolling and puts them together. Another special feature of enzyme catalysts is their specificity. This means that one enzyme can only affect a small number of molecules. Essentially, the enzyme makes a place to hold the incoming molecules and make sure that they're in the correct orientation or order or position. I mean, we wouldn't want our wingmate pulling together two people that clearly aren't meant for each other. But back to the science. The molecules that are affected by an enzyme are called substrates. The active site is where the substrate is being held and is where all the action happens. For example, in a ribosome subunit enzyme, the mRNA substrate fits into the active site to undergo translation. This is where the enzyme can assist in the reaction, in this case to initiate, elongate, and terminate the growing peptide chain. In essence, the active site is where we expect to change the molecule or to affect a chemical reaction. Enzymes are ultimately just fancy proteins, so they're made up of amino acids. The individual amino acids have to assemble into a special active site on the enzyme. Enzymes are very selective, though, about what substrates can bind to their active site. The active site needs to match a substrate based on a variety of factors that include the shape, the size, charge, polarity, and hydrophilicity versus hydrophobicity. Essentially, the substrate needs to be able to physically fit in the active site, but also must have a chemically compatible match. One way to illustrate this concept is to compare two relatively similar enzymes like chymotrypsin and trypsin, both of which are involved in protein digestion. In the case of chymotrypsin, serine acts as the active site that binds phenylalanine. That activates chymotrypsin to cleave the peptide bonds in proteins, and this is all through a hydrolysis reaction. Trypsin also cleaves proteins in a hydrolysis reaction, but because it has a slightly different function, it also has a slightly different binding site. Trypsin uses aspartate as the active site for lysine to bind. This activates the enzyme and allows it to break down proteins. Every active site and substrate relationship is a little different, but the job of an enzyme in general is always the same, to grease a reaction up so it can proceed forward at a faster rate. But the active site might still not be perfectly the same size of the substrate. Enter the induced fit model. The induced fit model basically says that the active site won't be a perfect fit until the right substrate comes along. That will cause a change in the enzyme called a conformational change. According to the induced fit model, conformational changes are possible before, during, and after the actual reaction. And to bust a common misconception, physical changes can happen to both the active site on the enzyme and the substrate. The end result is that they fit together properly and the reaction can go forward. X-ray crystallography of enzymes also helps confirm that an enzyme takes on a different form before the substrate binds compared to after it releases. The crystallography snapshots show the protein literally changing formation even without a substrate binding to it first. Beyond active site binding, some enzymes rely on coenzymes. Coenzymes are organic molecules that have to be present for the enzyme to work. A great example are essential vitamins like C and A. These are coenzymes. When coenzymes are bound so tightly that they're basically just part of the enzyme, that's called a prosthetic group. For example, cysteine residues on heme C are a prosthetic group. Because although cysteine isn't technically part of heme C can't work without cysteine. The two are so tightly bound together that they function as a single molecule. Coenzymes are organic molecules that enzymes need, but sometimes enzymes need inorganic ones as well. The inorganic molecules are called cofactors and are usually metal ions. The minerals that people add in their diets, like calcium or potassium, are literally metal ions, which are needed to make all of their proteins run smoothly. When an enzyme has a metal ion bound to it, it's referred to as a metalloprotein. If all the cofactors and coenzymes an enzyme needs are there, it's whole and ready to go. Conveniently, this whole enzyme is called, well, a holo, spelled HOLO, enzyme. If the enzyme doesn't have all the necessary stuff it needs, it's an apoenzyme, and it can't get its job done. Not all enzymes catalyze the same reaction. Just as our prom's DJ has a choice between a slow ballad, a rock hit, or even some dubstep, enzymes are categorized by the reactions they perform. Conventionally, there are 6 different types of enzymes: ligases, isomerases, lyases, hydrolases, oxidoreductases, and transferases. Now, this list may seem just a little daunting, but we can make a Lil Hot mnemonic to help you remember the 6 classes. It's literally Lil Hot. The first letter of each enzyme class, ligases, isomerases, lyases, hydrolases, oxidoreductases, and transferases, spells out Lil Hot. Let's start with ligases. Ligases use ATP to link biological molecules together. We generally see ligases functioning during DNA synthesis or DNA repair. DNA ligases come in to fill in the gaps between Okazaki fragments. Isomerases rearrange the atomic connections within a molecule. An isomerase can catalyze one molecule to reconfigure itself into another molecule entirely, like phosphoglycerate mutase, which moves a phosphate group between 2 carbons, turning 3-phosphoglycerate to, well, 2-phosphoglycerate in glycolysis. 2 types of cleaving enzymes are lyases and hydrolases. Lyases are enzymes that split molecules without water. When these portions are broken off, they tend to form rings or multiple bonds in order to reestablish the octet of electrons around each atom. A great example of this is argininosuccinate lyase, which breaks down argininosuccinate to arginine and fumarate. Hydrolases add water into a reaction, causing a molecule to break into its components and bond to the hydrogen and hydroxide molecules that come from water. For example, pepsin is a hydrolase that breaks down proteins into peptides and amino acids. Fun fact though, because it breaks down proteins, it can also be characterized more specifically as a protease. Next, we'll discuss oxidoreductases. These catalyze the transfer of electrons between biological molecules. One example is glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate dehydrogenase, which transfers an electron from glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate to NAD+, generating 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate and NADH. That MCAT is a mouthful, but our last enzyme, transferases, do what their names imply. Transfer functional groups between independent molecules, often using coenzyme donors. Transferases are typically named after the functional group being moved. One exception to this rule, though, is kinase. Kinases transfer phosphate groups to another molecule, but these are often named based on the molecule that they're phosphorylating. An example of this is phosphofructokinase, which adds a phosphate group to fructose 6-phosphate to make fructose 1,6-biphosphate. Now, this entire lesson was filled with a ton of words and a huge mouthful, but luckily, all you really have to remember is the enzyme class to help you know what each one does. This lesson might not have been as special as a high school prom, but let's look back at some magical memories. Enzymes are biological catalysts that speed up biological reactions, like the prom DJ or that wingmate. Active sites are where the subunits bind to and induce conformational changes in the enzymes, and coenzymes and cofactors are organic and inorganic molecules, respectively, that are necessary to make enzymes work. And Little Hot might help you
Enzymes are biological catalysts which speed up essential chemical reactions throughout the body, and without them, we would not exist. But just because they're important, that doesn't mean we want them working full speed ahead at all times. If we run out of substrate, for example, enzymes cannot continue working. And in other instances, we want to turn certain enzymes off so the cell can fulfill its function. What determines how quickly enzyme-catalyzed reactions occur? And how do we regulate enzyme activity? Enzyme kinetics is the study of the rates of enzyme-catalyzed reactions. Enzyme kinetics studies usually involve measuring the rate of a reaction under varying conditions. How is the rate affected by changing the substrate concentration? What about the enzyme concentration? Do changes in temperature, pH, or salinity change the rate? Depending on the enzyme, all of these varied conditions can have an impact on reaction speed, but enzyme and substrate concentration are the most important. In general, adding more substrate increases the rate of an enzyme-catalyzed reaction. But with enough substrate, the active sites of the enzymes will be fully saturated, and at that point, adding more substrate will not appreciably change the rate of reaction. The enzyme is already working at maximum velocity. When considering enzyme kinetics, we often use the Michaelis-Menten equation. This equation pairs very nicely with the graph of rate versus concentration. The Michaelis-Menten equation describes how the rate of an enzyme-catalyzed reaction depends on the concentration of both the enzyme and the substrate. If E stands for enzyme and S stands for substrate, ES, the enzyme-substrate complex, is formed at a rate K1. The enzyme-substrate complex can then either dissociate at a rate K inverse, or the reaction can complete, forming a product in the regenerated enzyme, and this step occurs at rate Kcat. This reaction formula gives us the foundation for understanding the Michaelis-Menten equation, where Km is the substrate concentration corresponding to a reaction velocity that is 50% of Vmax. Now let's examine how this equation relates to the graph of rate versus concentration. In the Michaelis-Menten equation, V equals Vmax times the concentration of substrate divided by Km plus the concentration of substrate. In the graph, at 1/2 of the maximum velocity, the half-max reaction speed corresponds to a substrate concentration equal to Km. Km is known as the Michaelis constant, and besides being important for the Michaelis-Menten equation, Km can also be used as a measure of an enzyme's affinity for its substrate. When an enzyme has a higher Km, that means it has a lower affinity for its substrate, because more substrate is required to reach half of the maximum enzyme velocity. A lower Km then indicates that an enzyme has a higher affinity for its substrate because less substrate is required to reach the half-max speed. The graph of reaction rate shows asymptotic behavior. This is the usual shape for Michaelis-Menten relationship. When the substrate concentration is less than Km, even small changes in substrate concentration will greatly affect the reaction rate. At substrate concentrations above Km, the reaction rate is less affected by changes in substrate concentration. Rate increases much more slowly as it approaches Vmax, and at Vmax, the reaction rate is independent of substrate concentration. Now recall for a moment, Kcat is the rate at which the enzyme-substrate complex turns into product and regenerated enzyme. This Kcat value can be related to Vmax. Kcat measures the number of substrate molecules converted to product per enzyme molecule per second. So if we multiply the enzyme concentration, then we get the max number of substrate molecules converted to product per second, which is Vmax. One implication of this formula is that a greater enzyme concentration results in a higher Vmax, which makes sense. More enzyme means more active sites, means more opportunity to convert substrate to product without worrying about saturation. Finally, one more interesting way to combine these variables. The ratio of Kcat over Km is called the catalytic efficiency of the enzyme. Think about what this ratio tells you. A large Kcat indicates that the enzyme is very good at turning bound substrate into product, and a small Km indicates a high affinity for the substrate in the first place. So a high Kcat and a small Km means substrate binds easily and then is rapidly converted to product. Mathematically, a large numerator with a small denominator means a greater catalytic efficiency. Some enzymes show a sigmoidal S shape when graphed on a Michaelis-Menten plot. These enzymes are demonstrating cooperativity. Cooperativity is when the binding of a ligand to one site influences the binding at a second site. Cooperative enzymes are always made of multiple subunits with multiple active sites. The enzyme subunits can exist in one of two states. The first is a low-affinity tense state, abbreviated as T. The second is a high-affinity relaxed state, abbreviated as R. These abbreviations are handy because they make sense. T stands for tense, and when you're tense, you're probably not able to work as effectively or efficiently. R stands for relaxed, and in this comfortable state, enzyme subunits are more likely to bind substrate to convert to product. Now remember, we're talking about cooperativity here. So the binding of substrate to one subunit encourages the transition of other subunits from the tense state to the relaxed state. These newly relaxed subunits have an increased likelihood of binding to substrates, and more substrate binding generally means an increase in reaction rate. Thus, the substrate concentration increases, the slope of the curve gets steeper, indicating an acceleration in reaction rate. Still though, as substrate levels reach saturating amounts, the curve plateaus to an asymptote as usual. Now, cooperativity works in both directions. So loss of substrate by one subunit can encourage the transition of other subunits from the R state to the T state, promoting dissociation of substrate from those subunits. If you think of cooperative enzyme kinetics as a party, as more people start arriving, the atmosphere becomes more relaxed and the party seems more appealing. As people begin to leave, the party dies down, and more people decide to follow the lead of their friends and head home. Cooperativity works just like this. Now, even though we call cooperativity cooperative, it can actually go either way, making further binding easier or harder. We use a numerical value called Hill's coefficient to indicate the nature of the cooperativity. When Hill's coefficient is greater than 1, positive cooperative binding is occurring, meaning further binding is encouraged. When Hill's coefficient is less than 1, negative cooperative binding is occurring, which means that the binding of one ligand decreases the enzyme's affinity for further ligands. When Hill's coefficient is equal to 1, the enzyme does not exhibit cooperative binding. Without enzymes, you and I wouldn't be here, but that doesn't mean we want all enzymes running all the time. To be effective and useful, we have to be able to control enzyme activity. Enzyme regulation can occur in a variety of ways. One common method of enzyme control is feedback regulation. In this process, products further down a metabolic pathway regulate an enzyme's activity. There are two main kinds of feedback regulation. The first, feedback inhibition or negative feedback, is the most common. With feedback inhibition, when enough of a product has been produced, we turn off or inhibit the pathway that creates the product, helping to maintain homeostasis. Often this type of feedback occurs by having the product bind to the active site of the enzyme that acted earlier in the pathway, making that enzyme unavailable for use. For instance, the glycolysis enzyme phosphofructokinase is inhibited by high levels of ATP. This inhibition shuts off glycolysis, a pathway that would otherwise produce more ATP. The second kind of feedback regulation is feedback activation, but this is much rarer. In feedback activation, the end product of a pathway activates an enzyme involved in that pathway. Another type of regulation is feed-forward regulation. Compare these two names for a second. In feedback regulation, a downstream product feeds back by activating or deactivating an earlier enzyme, earlier back in the pathway. By contrast, in feed-forward regulation, an intermediate earlier in the process goes forward and acts on one of the enzymes later in the process. For example, during glycolysis, the intermediate made in the rate-limiting step is a molecule called fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. This intermediate feeds forward by activating the final enzyme in the pathway, pyruvate kinase. Consider the end effect. The last reaction is sped up, so the second to last reaction speeds up, so the third to last reaction speeds up, and so on. Feeding forward to activate the last reaction is like bursting a dam. Everything upstream surges forward, and in the end, a flood of product ensues. Since feedback inhibition is one of the most common methods for enzyme regulation, you'll want to know a little more about it. The two most common types of inhibition are competitive and non-competitive inhibition. In competitive inhibition, an inhibitor competes with the substrate for occupying the active site. Now, competitive implies that you can win. And indeed, if more substrate is added, the enzymes are more likely to bind substrate than inhibitor, and the inhibition can be overcome. This means that in competitive inhibition, Vmax remains unchanged. If enough substrate is added, the substrate will outcompete the inhibitor so that the reaction can proceed at maximum velocity. Still, a higher substrate concentration will be required than if no inhibitor was present, so the Km value increases. A higher substrate concentration is now required to reach half of Vmax. On a Michaelis-Menten plot, this appears as a right shift. In general, a right-shifted plot means that the same final end result is reached, it's just harder to get there, which fits because this is a type of inhibition. By contrast, in non-competitive inhibition, the inhibitor does not compete with the substrate. Instead, the inhibitor binds to an allosteric site somewhere else on the enzyme, and this binding changes the enzyme's conformation, making it unable to bind the substrate. The enzyme is therefore effectively removed from the pool of active enzymes, and with fewer active enzymes, Vmax is reduced. Those enzyme molecules that are still uninhibited, however, they have the same affinity for the substrate, meaning Km is unchanged. In a Michaelis-Menten plot, it will appear that the graph has been crushed downward. Vmax is reduced, so the asymptotic maximum is lower, but Km remains the same, so the curve is neither right or left shifted. Remember that the study of enzyme kinetics examines the speed of enzyme-catalyzed reactions and helps us understand the kinds of factors impacting enzyme reaction speeds. Michaelis-Menten plots illustrate enzyme kinetics and identify important values like Vmax and Km. Cooperativity alters enzyme kinetics, changing the shape of the Michaelis-Menten plot. And the shape of Michaelis-Menten plots can also be impacted by other factors, like competitive or non-competitive inhibitors. But also, inhibition isn't necessarily always a bad thing, since things like feedback inhibition allow us to regulate biological reaction rates and stay within the range of physiologically favorable internal conditions.
Oh, I just gasped. Holy shit. American is one half of mass was.
What day at the carnival is complete without emptying your wallet trying to win a game that sometimes seems unwinnable? Have you seen the game where you swing a sledge onto a platform to gauge your strength? This game goes by many names, but for our purposes, we'll refer to it as the High Striker game. Explaining the surprising complexity of the High Striker game will require us to dive deep into the concepts of work and energy. Let's Let's start by acknowledging that energy is a surprisingly difficult term to define in a simple way. So let's not define it simply. Let's explore its full complexity. First, we have to backtrack from energy to an important concept in science, properties of matter. Some properties of matter are intrinsic properties. These are the ones that identify a substance, like density or specific heat. There are also extrinsic properties, ones that can change based on the context or surroundings. Weight, shape, and volume are some common examples. This is where we get our first important understanding of energy. Energy is an extrinsic property of matter. It changes based on the context. The goal of the high striker game is to give the puck inside the column the energy that it didn't originally have. But this isn't the full picture of energy's complexity. Let's continue with the slightly more intuitive side of things. Energy related to movement, kinetic energy. Kinetic energy can be explained by referring to Newton's 3 laws. First, an object at rest stays at rest, and an object in motion stays in motion, unless acted upon by an unbalanced outside force. Unbalanced forces cause a change in the motion, whereas balanced forces occur when all forces on the object cancel out and the object's motion is constant. Second, change in motion or acceleration is directly proportional to the unbalanced force and inversely proportional to the mass of the object, often simplified as force is equal to mass times acceleration. And finally, a force is an interaction between two things, a push or a pull between them. These pairs of forces are acting in the two interacting objects with equal amounts of the same type of force, but opposite directions. This is often stated as, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction, which is true, but often misunderstood. So be careful with this law. That misunderstanding is the balanced forces on an object are these action-reaction pairs, but that cannot be true. Balanced forces are acting on the same object, while action-reaction pairs, described by the third law, are acting on two interacting objects. Consider what this means for a moving object, like the hammer we swing in the high striker game. For simplicity's sake, we're going to call the force when the hammer hits the pad to be constant from the moment it touches to the moment it comes to a complete stop. During that time, it is slowing down. The question becomes, what does it take to bring the hammer to a stop? Even the smallest amount of net force opposite to the hammer's direction of motion will eventually stop it. Smaller forces will require more distance. Larger forces will require less distance. In science, that relationship is of major importance. When two terms are inverse, it suggests that they can be multiplied together to equal a constant. Let's explore that using the laws of motion, Newton's second law, and a kinematic equation. When we combine them and do a little bit of rearrangement, we find that the force that stops the moving object times the distance that it moves while it stops is equal to 1/2 times the mass of the object times its original speed squared. That may look like a familiar expression. A common way to read that is kinetic energy is equal to work. But now we get a step closer to understanding why defining energy is so complicated. Energy is inextricably linked with the concept of work, so definition for the two often become circular. Before we untangle those concepts, let's consider what makes the concept of energy so useful. Newton's third law states that forces happen in equal and opposite pairs. So if something is exerting a force that stops a moving mass, like the pad that we're slamming with a hammer, that exact force happens in the exact same amount, but in the opposite direction, onto the pad. This is what makes energy of movement so important. A moving thing has the ability to exert a force on other things based on its speed and mass. So what we have now is that kinetic energy, an extrinsic property of matter, determined by mass and speed, that characterizes how far a moving thing can exert a force, push, or pull on something else. Now, let's circle back to untangle the mess of energy's definition and the way it's intertwined with work. The definition of work that might best set you up for a successful understanding is the process that transfers energy using a force. For now, let's just think of transferring energy as losing or gaining kinetic energy, but we're going to return to that later. We already saw this demonstrated with the high striker, with the hammer slowing down to a stop when it hits the pad. The kinetic energy the hammer had equal to 1/2 mv squared, is lost while it strikes the pad due to the force from the pad pushing up on it for the distance the pad is pushed down. So the pad did work on the hammer, causing it to lose kinetic energy. But let's consider what happens inside the high striker column. Don't worry about the mechanism that allows for the transfer. Let's just say that the energy from the hammer is going to be transferred to the puck. This is done by a mechanism inside the column pushing up or exerting a force on the puck for a distance. The kinetic energy that that puck gains would be equal to the force exerted on it times whatever distance it was exerted. Knowing the kinetic energy it was getting from the hammer and the mass of the puck, we could rearrange the math to find the speed it starts moving upwards. This fundamental idea is the work kinetic energy theorem. It states that a net force on an object will do work on that object, transferring kinetic energy to it or from that object equal to the work done. The work is equal to the force times the distance over which the force is applied. We often hear that energy must be conserved. The total amount of it in existence does not change. However, so far we haven't explained where this kinetic energy in the hammer and the puck comes from and where it goes to. There was a time before the hammer was dropped where it wasn't moving, so it didn't have kinetic energy. The puck will reach some height where it stops moving, since gravity slows it down while it moves up. Let's start with the hammer. While it's not moving, there is something special about it: its position. It has potential energy. Just like kinetic energy, we want to consider potential energy to be an extrinsic property of matter. However, whereas kinetic energy is dependent upon the matter's motion, potential energy is dependent upon the position. The important characteristic of the hammer here is its height, which then leads to a question. So what's so important about up and down? Why do things not gain potential energy when they move left or east? The answer is gravity. Up is a direction against gravity, and down is a direction in which gravity pulls. And gravity is a special force, one which we call a conservative force. And this is what leads to potential energy, the existence of conservative forces. These are forces that act based upon position and will always be the same when the position of the relative objects are the same. Gravity is the perfect example. All objects with mass are attracted to other objects with mass, more so as they get closer. As the hammer falls, it's falling because gravity is pulling it down. And as it falls, that force continues to act for the entire distance of the fall. And here, we're back to work. The special thing about conservative forces is that they're able to do work to increase the kinetic energy of an object based upon that object's position. This means that by the bottom of the fall, the hammer will have gained kinetic energy equal to the force of gravity on it times the distance it fell. This equation for weight is mass times the acceleration due to gravity, which on Earth is 9.8 meters per second per second. So that's m times g. And the distance that matters is only the height. As we saw, gravity pulls down, so the up-down direction of motion matters. So the equation for gravitational potential energy is mass times gravity times height. The importance of height demonstrates a concept about potential energy and conservative forces called path independence. Any movement in any other direction has no effect on movement that cannot change in ball. The same mass as the hammer down a ramp that started at the same height. The ball would have the same kinetic energy at the bottom as the hammer does after it drops. They take two different paths, but that change in height is the same. So the change in potential energy is the same. We should consider another example of potential energy that happens inside the high striker device, elastic potential energy, which gets temporarily stored within a spring. When the spring is being compressed, it pushes back to return to its original shape. Just like gravity at each point along the path, while compressing and restoring the force, is the same based on position. Unlike gravity, though, we can't treat the force as constant while the spring compresses. The force starts at 0, then it increases as the spring is compressed, based upon the characteristic of the spring, called the spring constant, which we will call K. The force of the spring at any given moment can be found by multiplying K times the amount that it's compressed, which we will call X. This is measured by how much its length has changed from its original size. We can find that the work that is done while compressing the spring by taking the average of the initial force and the final force and multiplying that by the distance the spring is compressed. Since the initial force is 0, the average is just half of the final force. So that's 1/2 times kx, then times the distance it is compressed. This winds up giving us 1/2 kx squared. The total compression x is in there twice because it was used to find the final force, and it's distance that the force gets multiplied by in order to find work. Every conservative force has its own type of potential energy, and they all store an amount of energy, own type of every conservative in order to find work. Every conservative force has its own type of potential energy, and they all store an amount of energy based on the distance over which the force can act and the average force would exert over that distance. Magnetism, the electrostatic force, gravity, and elastic or spring forces that will allow 1930s. Some unscrupulous game operators rigged their high striker games. Their games were simpler than the ones today. No springs or sensors or anything. Just a board on a fulcrum, so it could rotate when it hit, and a mass on a wire resting on the other side of the board. When the board was hit, the kinetic energy would be transferred, by work, to the mass on the wire. The mass would slide up the wire and hit the bell to indicate a winner. Without interference from the game operator, to win, you give the mass enough kinetic energy that it will move up high enough to hit the bell before gravity has stopped it. So the kinetic energy to give the mass to ring the bell would be equal to the gravitational potential energy the mass would have when it gets to the bell. You give the mass that much energy or more, and you win. But there's a way for that kinetic energy to turn into something other than gravitational potential energy while the mass slides up that wire. The kinetic energy and potential energy we've discussed so far are typically referred to as mechanical energy, large-scale energy of motion and position that we can easily observe. All matter is made of particles, and atoms and molecules that are constantly in motion based on the temperature of the matter. When any object moves, like the mass on the wire, it's bumping into the atoms and molecules of the things around it, like the air and the wire. This makes the particles move faster, but makes the object slower. To change motion, there must be a force. The force here is friction, or we call it drag for the force of the air on the mass as it's moving. Friction and drag are examples of non-conservative forces. They don't store potential energy, and they're not based on position. They're based on motion. The non-conservative forces all convert kinetic energy of a moving material to kinetic energy of the material's particles and the particles surrounding it. That kinetic energy of moving particles, measured by temperature, is thermal energy. If that motion is organized into vibrations, it's sound energy. That means kinetic energy of the mass is being lost to warming up the mass in the wire and making sound as it moves through the air. If the mass moving up the wire started with just enough kinetic energy that it would ring the bell, energy lost because of friction and drag will mean that it won't get all of the way there. The way that the old-time game operators rigged the game was with a foot pedal that could make the wire more or less tight. When the wire is tight, the mass could slide with less friction, so they could demonstrate a small child swinging the hammer and hitting the mass. But then, when a strong-looking adult got ready to swing the hammer, the operator would loosen the wire using their foot pedal. The mass would then shake more on its way up, experiencing more friction and converting more kinetic energy into sound energy and thermal energy. The mass wouldn't get to the top. So what is energy really? At this point, we've said that it's an extrinsic property of matter. But it would be best not to then give it one definition. Energy is really two things: kinetic energy and potential energy. What's special is that the two transfer between one another, from kinetic to potential, or from potential to kinetic. So they are linked properties that are together defined as energy. And work is the process of transferring them by a force acting for a distance. That 1930s high striker operator might not have engaged in the most virtuous of business practices, but by thinking through his rigged game, we can take into account
36. Ooh. Substate is 22. Oh Lord. Is that not what I did? Fuck, I forgot to have it. Damn it, bitch. Don't go. Mass 90. Gravity 10. Oh. I just rearranged to find the velocity. Ah. Okay. I understand it now. Yeah. Damn, bro. 6 hours left? Fuck, you're not even 6 hours in a day, bro. Chill.
SSG just bleeding Shopify Rebellion a little bit on that roam. By and large, playing a bit closer to the site than before. Making use of that pulse to gain information can also influence Newers' play up top. And while they lose the Dokkaebi, the Rebellion keep the Blitz. They keep that shield, what has been a very big difference maker for them. Canadian is allowed to get active down below. Here he is. But this time, he's not catching SSG off guard. They can hear him clomping around. He's not speeding up the pace. Shopify Rebellion are running out of time. They'll try to create an alternative avenue. I like this switch. But again, information. Shopify Rebellion switching places, making late calls, and trying to find a home for the diffuser. Yet with only 1 HP, Shopify Rebellion has to cover. They have to be clean. And no shots landed on that C4. It's a tie game at the half.
Jay, I know, is one of the best players for SSG and consistently shows himself to be so. That Zoto canister has literally just won them the round. Okay, so why are we bringing Zotos? Well, you've banned all the hard breaches, so it's quite a good question because you start thinking, well, you know, what can you do? Slow the Maverick down a little bit, stop the tin openers. But it's such a great tool against those shields, especially when they're moving through those choke points. Little combination, Zoto canister goes out, C4 over the top, bish, bash, bosh, and you've got yourself a round when it really matters most. SSG now tie the game. Now, interestingly, if you have been listening since the start, I did mention how this has been, well, a map for SSG that, let's be honest, if you ignore certain results, they look fantastic. Their attack isn't something that can be ignored, Lynx. They have a 39% win percentage on the attacking rounds. So I don't know how much hope I'm holding out here, given that they've gone 3-3 on the half and maybe haven't leveraged that defensive side as well as they could have done, given that that is their favored side.
I really hope we don't see that percentage today. Well, one, because that would make for a very boring half we're about to watch. But also because it would be wildly inconsistent with the attacking prowess we saw from SSG on Clubhouse. Making really good use of their positioning, the comms, you could really see that they were flowing between the team, rotating at the right time, providing support when needed. They won 5 out of the 6 rounds, of course, but it was often on the back of that cohesion. Finding those opportunities, and in particular, Ashen, taking the initiative, 1 in 6 right now. And it was the attacking side where he got the majority of his kills and made a lot of the impressive work that he did on Clubhouse. Given the similarities between the maps, I'd be kind of surprised and really disappointed if SSG fall off like that and this ends up being, well, I suppose another quick game for SSG on Nighthaven, but they're quick in wins and quick in losses. Based on how we're looking right now, if their attacks don't look good, this is going to be a very dominant win for Shopify Rebellion.
It could very well be. But let's be honest, it's best of 3. You're always going to have a map that's exposed to you. You've just got to make sure that it's one that you're happy to be exposed on. So SSG, if they were really thinking that they were struggling on this map, could have very easily banned it out and gone somewhere else. That hasn't happened. And here we are. Now, they're going to be dealing with a similar playing field to what we saw Shopify Rebellion have to deal with. In that 2 of the primary hard breaches are banned. For the meantime, Ace is up. And it will be used every round until, I assume, it is banned out, as we often see that being the trend here. But if speed is anything that we want to talk about, this is already seeming fairly slow, especially compared to SR when they really got themselves going. They were looking pretty good on these attacks, and they're often moving with a lot of conviction in the early portions. Information game starting to be gathered now, but this isn't a lineup that you want to be playing slow into, Lynx. It's quite a lot of time burn here that Shopify are bringing.
And especially that clash. I mentioned on the last map that this is something that, when left up, Shopify Rebellion typically like to play. And if they don't play in the first 3 rounds, it means they might just be saving it for the next 3. In the case here, Canadian brings it out for the first defense, and combined with the Kibas, the Black Mirrors, you're right. There's a lot of tools you have to be worried about, or at least you're going to have some difficulties pushing through. That being said, if you are able to do so, the site itself doesn't have a lot of utility. No Vulcan packs, you only have the smokes, but hitting shots like that, well, you don't need utility. 2-piece for Rexen as the entire backside of the push basically falls into pieces. Ashen, who's normally finding gaps, is picking up the rear from that failed attack over on connector side. Jan, I know, choked out of electrical. And stuck outside the window. It's not really looking likely that SSG will come back from this one. They don't have any vertical angles, don't have any backstab potential. It's far too late to rotate. Rexen is not losing a single fight on this wall. Finally, he does. Benja with 2. Yet going down in the process. Jan, I know, has time to revive, but stuck in front of the electricity. They're both slowed, put to even lower HP. This is the easiest round for Shopify that they've ever had to clean up, retaking their lead, and SSG resuming the struggle.
This is what we expect from Shopify. We want them to start really putting that pedal to the metal now and increasing the pace in this fixture a little bit. Put SSG under that pressure. And they did a very good job of that. You look at the bans. Cade Bandit. I don't know if it's the way to go. Look how much success SSG saw when they removed the Clash. You know that Canadian's going to play the Clash. He might even play it. Okay, he's not playing it in this round, but he's at least going to play it on the top floor, and there's a very good chance he's going to play it in the mid floor. So you know that you're going to be getting a lot of good value out of that. Just seems a little bit like a missed opportunity there to remove both of those denial operators when, let's be honest, you know you're going to have a problem breaching anyway. You know you're going to end up on a Maverick at some point. Just kind of putting off the inevitable, right?
Well, another thing I was going to say was that one thing we saw Shopify Rebellion do on their half was shield 5 out of the 6 rounds. And on a map where, even with both hard breach and Alband, you might still have a little bit of trouble breaching. But because the defense doesn't have to bring Bandit, they don't have to bring Cade, they're going to bring a lot more annoying site operators. It can be good to bring a Monty, get in the face of a player like Rexen, take some control in a bit of a safer way. I think that's why we see Fultz switching to it in this round. Looking to some of the successes they had on Clubhouse, or some of the successes Shopify Rebellion have had on Nighthaven so far, I think this will be a good swap, especially on a site like Basement, to either move in through the breach or move down the staircase, or even like they did before, just hot drop the hatch and feel a little bit more safety than if you were playing some different op.
Ashen's starting to creep his way in this time on IQ. SSG going to be looking for that opening once again here. Got a good bit of information there, and Spoy gets caught on the catch. Brilliant support there from Ambi as well. A really good back and forth from both of these two teams. Newers, right place at the right time to catch the player dropping, and there was good information on that. But then you got good positioning from Ambi to be the right place at the right time to support his teammate dropping back. And as such, it costs pretty much nothing. And to be honest, you look at who it favors, definitely favors the defense. They've only lost the Goyo. The Vulcan packs are already placed down. What are you going to do about your soft breach now, Lynx? You've lost your RAM.
Yeah. Lost your RAM and no breaching charge substitutes, no primary utility substitutes either. Definitely a trade that favors the defense, unless this comes down to gunfights. And Ambi is low HP, and knowing these two teams, it could very well come down to gunfights. But in terms of the utility, for the early to mid game, the loss is a much heavier burden for Space Station Gaming at the moment. A lot of presence by Shopify Rebellion inside of Exo at the moment. Rexen taking a gander up the staircase. Ambi ready for the C4 down below. The one player not in this position, Canadian, has just shot Benjamaster from I don't even know where. SSG will try to take the initiative and pick up the pace, but as they drop down, you can see Shopify are well aware of it. Rebellion fires some shots their way. Fultz tries to make his way in. This is the benefit of the Monty. You can reach behind, but 2 C4s and a toxic canister. This is not the play I think SSG were hoping it would be. Even the off spot is spotted. The C4 goes out. Fultz is triangulated, figured out, done and dusted. Ashen with 1, tags up a second, but the time is running low. Minimal opportunity to pick up that diffuser. He will make it, yet it's only J9O to cover. No C4s remaining. Only one toxic canister, and Ashen on the follow-up will pick up one. J9O with the next. All of a sudden, again, Ambi, it really does come down to the 1 HP. Only one bullet required. That's it. Looks to make it around the corner. J9O smacks him down. Funny the way things come back to bite you. It is the health that does Ambi in the end, but boy, what a recovery by Ashen in the late game.
I'll tell you what, the determination on this SSG roster is commendable. They are never out until it's over. They had a really good position there as well, let's be honest. Okay, it wasn't ideal. I think Shopify, I think the only thing that they didn't have to throw at them was the kitchen sink, because we saw C4s, we saw toxic babe canisters. Poor old Fultz, just in a world of hurt. He may as well have been playing a sponge operator at that point, but for all of the attention that it attracted, it opened the gates for the final two players to get the job done when it mattered most. Ashen was able to move up, push forward, pick up that diffuser, and continue the bait out. And Shopify, they kind of overheated. I feel like they threw everything at once and just needed to pace it out a little bit more. There was quite a bit of time left, and that's what was really nice about the position that SSG found themselves in. They got into that position with enough time in the 3 versus 3 to bait things out. Granted, it could have been elongated a little bit, and I think that Shopify could have burnt a bit more time had they spread that out a little bit, but it kind of looked like a layup from their point of view. The flip side is SSG, they felt like they were in control for the majority.
Not in control of this game, though. Got to do a little bit more work for that. Do well in that round. Keep a good pace. Close it out. But to actually qualify to SI to win this series 2-0, which is not a requirement, would be very nice. Got a little bit more to do, a little bit more to prove. Time and tested strategy for Shopify Rebellion. Seen Spoit bring out the Scopos on this site, on this map, quite a few times. I hope SSG will be ready for it once they spot that the site is cafeteria and kitchen. You know Spoit's going to be moving around on that top floor, gunning for the kills over on connector side. But right now, Benja going for the lurk, instead creating a little bit of an opening on the lateral. He might find himself taking a fight with Surf momentarily, who sends out a Kiba and reveals his presence. The Benja is more focused on Ambi, the Fenrir in 90 at the moment, who's playing very passive, wisely so. Unfortunately for SSG, nothing breaks quite yet.